Grease brings the wicked. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26. 10 consecutive draws are all wrong, and drawing cards will definitely cause trouble. Okay, so this is how you play it, right? I don't believe it. Seeing that he had lost all the money he had worked so hard to save, and had not gotten any tangible benefits, Lorne gritted his teeth, raised his hand, and drew a Herm script, opened the magic circle, and took out all the last of his family's assets. 13 bronze badges fell to the ground with a clang, looking quite shabby. These were the bits and pieces he had accumulated for more than half a month. Since the difficulty of daily book, weekly book, and high difficulty book is almost exponentially increasing, the exchange ratio between the three is 100:1. Therefore, if you want to exchange the bronze badge equivalent to the consolation prize in your hand for a silver badge that you have fought hard for, and then gamble big, you have to complete at least 100 daily books, which means it will take a full 100 days. Maybe, before he saves enough money, he will be out of money. The process is really quite pitfalls. With this time, it is better to go directly to the weekly book to get resources. But at the moment, there is no other way. I can only use the existing capital to try my luck in the friendship pool. It's a last resort. Lorne secretly complained, picked up the 12-sided dice on the ground weakly, and threw a point. 5 familiar snake patterns came into view, which represented the goddess of wisdom and war Athena. There are many ways to rank the gods of Olympus, but the most mainstream is to divide them according to strength and status. The 12 main gods just correspond to the 12 numbers on the dice. 1 Zeus, the king of gods, 2 Hera, the queen of heaven, 3 Poseidon, the god of the sea, 4 Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, 5 Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, 6 Apollo, the god of light, 7 Artemis, the goddess of hunting, 8 Ares, the god of war, 9 Aphrodite, the goddess of love, 10 Hephaestus, the god of fire, 11 Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, and 12 Hermes, the messenger of the gods. In the previous chapter 14, 3 was used to represent Ares, the god of war. This is not appropriate. It has been changed to 8. Please refresh. At this moment, seeing the result of the throw, Lorne was not excited at all, but had a constipated expression on his face. If it was a silver pool, this wave might be considered the first prize, but he happened to be drawing the crappy friendship pool now, and Athena usually couldn't get anything good here. In other words, it was probably the worst reward. Sure enough, as the dice on the ground stopped turning, the bronze badge in Lorne's hand twisted and changed, turning into a bronze coin with Athena's head on the front and an owl relief on the back. Reward, Athena's copper +1. Specific function, equivalent to $1 in circulation on the market. If you go to the city to buy a piece of bread, you have to owe 2. It's really not coming when it should come, and it's forcing itself in when it shouldn't come. It's really unlucky. While Lorne was depressed and complaining, he threw the Athena's copper in his hand into the magic circle. In the dark corner of the space, there were 2 more of the same kind, which were the results of the previous draws from the friendship pool. Don't panic. A small loss. There are still 12 chances. Lorne tried to comfort himself, and picked up the 12-sided dice again, and continued to play the friendship pool. Athena's bronze +1. Hera's silver +1. Athena's bronze +1. Athena's bronze +1. Athena's bronze +1. Athena's bronze +1. Zeus gold +1. 6 consecutive results made Lorne's facial muscles twitch violently, and it was a bit difficult to hold it. At this time of escaping, what's the point of giving money? When it's cold, it will explode more gold coins. And, sister, 4 out of 6 times it was you. Forget about you not coming to the silver pool. This is already a bronze game. It's really not worthy of your level. Give me a way out. Don't harm me, okay? At this moment, Lorne, with resentment towards a goddess of war and wisdom in his heart, picked up the 12-sided dice again, and simply broke the jar. The good news is that the goddess of wisdom and war seemed to have heard his prayers for the next few times, and she really didn't appear in the pool once. But instead, it was Oceanus' seafood +1, Hastia's recipe +1, Demeter's grain essence +2, Apollo's music +1, Artemis's prey +1. A series of suggestive oracles appeared in Lorne's mind one after another. The praying man, surrounded by the love of the gods, felt a sore nose and was moved to the point of wanting to cry. What the hell is this garbage? It's better to give me some cash so that I can buy a cemetery. Seeing that the 13 bronze badges that he had saved up with great difficulty were soon used up again, Luo clenched the last seedling in his hand weakly and looked at the serpentine 12-sided dice on the ground with grief and anger. He had never been so obsessed with drawing cards before. Even the cheating Krypton Guild game he participated in designing had a small guarantee of 10 consecutive purples. I've already thrown 12 times, and I haven't gotten anything. This is not how you play with a low friendship pool drop rate. Let's stop playing with dice. Can't we get something that can be used temporarily instead of asking for gold? While complaining about this crappy card drawing mechanism and shouting that no one would play this crappy game, Lorne honestly picked up the dice and threw the last chance. Under his nervous gaze, the dice rolled 2.5 circles and finally stopped at position 10. At the same time, as his hand sank, a green oracle appeared in his mind. The collection of the god of craftsmanship, wings of Icarus, damaged. In an instant, Lorne's almost lifeless face burst into a radiant look, and his eyes glowed as he looked at the light creature in his hand that looked like a bird's wing and was filled with the breath of wind element. Icarus, the son of the outstanding Greek craftsman Daedalus, according to mythology, was ordered to build a labyrinth for King Minos on the island of Crete. Later, in order to avoid leaks, the king imprisoned the father and son. In order to escape, the wise Daedalus left the leftovers to lure seagulls into the tower, and then patiently collected the feathers of the seagulls, and also collected wax drops from the candles. Finally, Daedalus created a pair of wings for himself and his son with feathers, threads, and wax, giving humans the ability to fly. When everything was ready, the father and son spread their wings from the stone tower on the island to the Sea of Oceanus. But in the process of crossing the sea, Icarus forgot his father's warning before leaving, and blindly pulled up the altitude, causing the heat of the sun to melt the wax, and the feathers on his wings fell off one after another. By the time Icarus reacted, it was too late. He fell into the sea like a dead leaf out of control, and the pair of wings on his body also fell into the sea in pieces, and disappeared. At present, according to the existing results, it is very likely that Hephaestus, the god of craftsmanship, was attracted by the unique craftsmanship of the wings, and collected them as a collection in the treasury. Acceleration, can fly? Exclamation mark. At this moment, after sorting out the whole story, Lorne ignored the reminder of damage behind the wings of Icarus, and only the summary of the above 4 words was left in his mind. After a great ups and downs, the surprise of a bright future boiled in his heart. Not only did he send emergency equipment, but he also came with repair technology. Hephaestus is really a kind person. Lorne called up the blessing of the god of craftsmanship that he had previously regarded as useless, and looked at it again and again eagerly, without sparing words of praise in his heart, completely forgetting that he had just scolded him. Boom. Just as Lorne was immersed in the joy of shipping, a violent roar came from the island, and the gravel on the stone wall fell off, and the shrill screams and angry curses were faintly mixed in the wind. Those mad dogs are here again. Luon's face condensed, as if he was facing a great enemy. 3 more chapters to make up for the loss. Please vote for the new book. Please read it. Don't keep it up. It originally rushed to the top of the new fantasy book, but it was blown away by the ones behind it after only 2 days of happiness. Chapter 27. Those who play tactics are all dirty. On the nameless island, violent explosions and flames stirred up dust several meters high in the dense forest. The strong smell of blood rushed to the face, and the intermittent shrill screams were creepy. What are you still standing there for? Don't you have ears? Save people. The middle-aged man with narrow cheeks and a sinister face looked at his subordinates who were standing still like wooden stakes, gritted his teeth and growled. The 3 nearby guards wearing bronze armor with water patterns woke up from their dreams, rushed into the diffuse smoke and dust, dragged the 2 bloody companions out of the dense forest, and rescued them anxiously. How are these 2 useless things? Seeing that several subordinates had been busy for a while, but there was no improvement, the middle-aged man Darkris, the captain of the guards team, couldn't help but step forward to ask. The guard soldier in charge of the treatment answered with sweat on his forehead. Cyrano's leg is broken. Andris has a penetrating wound in the abdomen. They are all bleeding heavily. We have run out of magic potions, and we didn't bring any doctors with us, so we can't stop the bleeding at all. Then carry them to a nearby place with water. The blessing of the sea god will heal them. Do you still need me to teach you this? Darkris's narrow face was covered with dark clouds, and he cursed gloomily. Under the cold gaze of the captain, the 3 guards couldn't help but shudder, and immediately carried the 2 seriously injured companions to the nearby stream. A bunch of idiots. I really don't know how they passed the final examination. Darkris looked at the figures of several people fleeing in panic, and was even more angry, snorting with gnashing teeth. Forget it. They are just new recruits stuffed in by the superiors to get gold. Why are you angry with them? In the back, a man with a gauze covering his left eye and a physique as strong as a bear stepped forward and patted Darkris on the shoulder, smiling bitterly to comfort him. Since the start of this pursuit, this old friend who was known for his calmness has become increasingly angry, and the frequency of cursing and kicking people has also skyrocketed. Hearing the consolation, the low pressure lingering on Dakas's body was slightly relieved, his face regained some calmness, and he turned to look at the sturdy man behind him. Sorry, Andrew, I was irrational. The captain of the royal guard's eye stayed on the sturdy man's eye wrapped in gauze for a moment, and a trace of shame flashed in his eyes. The lost eyeball should have been his. If it weren't for this old comrade who pushed him at the critical moment and stood in front of him. When he thought of the bloody scene, Dakas's face became extremely gloomy, and a strong sense of humiliation came to his heart. He originally thought it was just a simple pursuit mission, but it turned into a nightmare that he couldn't bear to look back on. Along the way, they were exhausted by various accidents, talking trees, moving grass, trip-type magic traps connected by hair, triggered explosive runes pressed under the corpses of their companions. In addition, there was a desperate man who was elusive, proficient in various spells, and could still jump around after being hit by 2 secret arrows of orichalcum. These encounters and factors made them suffer a lot, and suffered heavy losses. Even he, a demigod, almost died in it. If he returned with this group of defeated soldiers, his career and fate could be imagined. Even if the 10 Kings Council showed mercy because of his hard work and great contributions over the years, those big and small god blood families could drown him with spit. In order to send these god blood descendants to the guards for gilding, they spent a lot of money and favors. In the end, not only did they not get gilded, but nearly half of them were killed or injured. Such a big mistake should be explained. Unfortunately, his size and weight made him the most suitable person to take the blame at the moment. Unless he can make up for his mistake and catch that bastard, maybe he can have a chance of survival. The captain of the royal guard, Darkris, sorted out his thoughts, rubbed his aching head, and made a solemn promise to his comrade, who was unfortunately involved. Don't worry, when we catch that bastard and report back to the Sea God Temple, I will report the losses to the 10 Kings Council and bear all the consequences. Captain, The sturdy man was about to speak when a scream suddenly came from the stream in front of him. The 2 men's faces changed, and they rushed to the scene immediately. What happened? Poison. Someone poisoned upstream. The 3 royal guards answered fearfully, and behind them, the 2 wounded soldiers who were hurriedly dragged out of the stream looked pale at this moment. Not only did their injuries not improve, but their bloody wounds were also festering rapidly. Bang! Darkris punched the huge tree next to him. That 2 people hugged together and looked at the upstream of the stream with bloodshot eyes and couldn't help cursing in his heart. Damn, what a beast. The guards nearby were also indignant. In their lives, most of the opponents they had encountered, whether they were titans or gods and monsters, spoke with strengthened fists, rushing up to fight with bare chests. Then, the winner stood up, and the loser lay down. Even if the target was a smart one, his methods were mostly relatively crude, and he often adopted some auxiliary strategies for the battle. Unlike this old bastard who poisoned, dug pits, laid traps, and launched sneak attacks, he had made conspiracy and trickery the mainstream and an art. When did such a shameless scum appear on the sea of Oceanus? That bastard must be nearby. Andrew, take 2 people to send the wounded to the seaside, and the rest of you come with me. Chop this bastard into pieces and feed him to the fish. Darkris gave the order with a gloomy face. Without waiting for his friend to dissuade him, he and another demigod deputy captain named Thanos took the remaining 4 guards and quickly surrounded the stream. As they were almost psychologically traumatized by the pit, the 2 demigods simply stimulated the divine fire in their bodies, pulling the huge magic tide to form a 10-meter long blue flame around them, and then rushed forward with themselves as the vanguard. Suddenly, wherever the 2 lights and shadows went, there was a mess, and the dense forests on both sides of the stream issued thunderous explosions one after another, and smoke and dust rose everywhere. 6. Very good. The troops are divided. It seems that the plan has succeeded. At this moment, Lorne at the upstream cave entrance roughly concluded the result, based on the sound and magic reaction, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Generally speaking, it is better to cripple enemy soldiers on the battlefield than to kill them directly. On the one hand, screams and blood can interfere with the opponent's judgment and affect the opponent's morale. On the other hand, the wounded need to be transferred and resettled after being disabled, so at least 1 person is involved in the transfer, and sometimes 2 people. This virtually increases the number of casualties in the battle. At first, Lorne thought so too, and did not kill them directly. As a result, he underestimated the almost abnormal self-healing ability and tenacious vitality of the species of the Age of Gods. Moreover, under the protection of the sea god, this group of Atlanteans with the blood of the gods, even if they were seriously injured, only needed to soak in the water to quickly recover and recover blood. Therefore, Lorne had no choice but to kill the opponent as directly as possible to reduce the threat factor. However, this time, his main purpose was to escape. It was absolutely worthwhile to use 2 wounded soldiers and a bottle of poison to contain another demigod and 2 golds. At present, according to the tips of Blessing of the God of Craftsmen, the materials for repairing wings of Icarus are mainly 2 kinds, bird feathers and high quality wax. He still has a lot of bird feathers in his warehouse, which he secretly saved when Zeus was molting. I think the feathers of the eagle witch are much better than ordinary seabird feathers. Next, there is only the raw material of wax. On the way to the island to recuperate, he seemed to have seen several beehives in the southwest, which should have beeswax that can be used. Time is running out, we must speed up. As the roar outside the cave got closer and closer, Lorne made up his mind to rush out of the cave before the pursuers blocked him in the cave and let go. Found it, there. The 6 pursuers who rushed over also found the traces of the target and rushed towards a culprit with gnashing teeth. Chapter 28. I gave you a chance, but you are useless. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the dense forest, the wind was raging. The compressed divine light stream, the dense herm spell bullets, and the sharp Aurich alchem secret arrows attacked from all directions, making sharp whimpers that tore through the air, falling like a shower of meteors, making explosions one after another. Boom, boom, boom. Lorne, who was in the center of the fire, directed a small amount of magic power to the vital parts, and launched a superimposed defense spell. The remaining majority was transferred to his legs, flexibly dodging the constantly flying gravel, wood chips, spell bullets and arrows, and increasing the speed of escape to the extreme. Even though the 2 demigods of Atlantis were old predecessors who had been promoted for a long time, and their accumulation of divinity and magic power was roughly higher than Lorne, they could only stare blankly at his coquettish movements and his slippery posture comparable to that of a sea eel, and followed him and ate dust. However, after all, they were veterans with combat experience. Seeing that the intensive offensive did not hinder the opponent's speed, the 2 demigods simply gave up this useless effort and followed suit, urging all their magic power to increase their speed to the extreme. However, after a few steps, crisp sounds of crackling came from under their feet. The 2 demigods could not help but stiffen their bodies, mechanically lowered their heads, and looked at the crystal runestone engraved with herms under their feet. The dazzling flames were gushing out as the runes shattered. Boom. Boom. Two explosions sounded behind them, and the rolling heat waves swept in all directions. Lorne raised the corners of his lips, outlining a trace of joy, but did not stop at all, and continued to run wildly towards the southwest of the island without looking back. This impact was just a drizzle for the demigods. Even if they were caught by surprise, it would be difficult to cause any effective damage. At most, it would delay them. If there were 7 times more, it might be about the same. Unfortunately, those were the last few pieces left. As Lorne sped up his speed to escape from the battle, he was even somewhat grateful to the silly teacher who had trained him to have a super strong physique and the ability to survive in desperate situations. Although the process was a bit painful, there was no doubt that he had directly or indirectly mastered a lot of life-saving skills. In this sea of Oceanus full of titans and gods and monsters, he might not be the strongest demigod, but he was definitely the best expert at running away. As we all know, only when you are alive can you output. Lorne kept his eyes and ears open, and at the same time, tried to maintain a good attitude and find joy in suffering. Finally, after running wildly for about a quarter of an hour, he finally arrived in front of the dense forest, where he had found the beehive before. But at the same time, the two dusty Atlantis demigods, relying on the advantages of divinity strength and magic level, gradually caught up with the gap between the two sides, and appeared on the gentle slope 100 meters away, staring at Lorne in front of them with bloodshot eyes. Their eyes were gloomy and cold. Just when the two wanted to rush forward and tear the bastard who had frustrated and humiliated them again and again into pieces and feed them to the fish, they unexpectedly saw that Lorne, who was 100 meters away, stopped and turned around, waved at them with a smile, and then slowed down and walked into the dense forest. The two demigods' faces froze, and they subconsciously stopped, their expressions changing. He's right in front. Catch him. The few golds who followed and didn't see this scene were pulled back by the two demigods behind them before they took a few steps. Idiot, do you want to die? Be careful of the ambush. The two demigods had dark faces and glared at the four burdens behind them, looking like they were disappointed. Time and time again, experience and lessons have proved that once the gold level guards act rashly, they are basically sending food. Moreover, the bastard's reaction must have set a trap inside and ambushed them. The two demigods went through a brainstorming process and looked at the dark dense forest, hesitating. At this moment, Lorne, who had entered the dense forest, was worried about himself first, and then he heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that the Atlantis guards behind him did not catch up with him immediately. Fortunately, the psychological shadow left by the early stage on these mad dogs was deep enough so that they dared not act rashly in a state of shock. But cleverness may backfire. That's probably the case. Lorne himself had been chased for more than half a month, and his family's wealth had been squeezed out. How could he have the time and materials to prepare a trap that could kill a demigod? The feint just now was purely an empty city plan. Fortunately, the other side really believed it. Lorne wiped the sweat from his forehead, walked quickly to two broadleaf trees that he could not name, knocked down the two beehives on them with stones, and then squeezed out the beeswax in the beehives under the flying bees. After the materials were gathered, he took out the bird feathers and the broken wings of Icarus, raised his hand, and touched the illusory oracle in front of him, activating the blessing of the god of craftsmanship. Suddenly, the silver-white secret culture was injected into the materials and items, like a fire, melting and reconstructing the three. Lorne rubbed his hands and waited anxiously for the smelting to be completed, but a moment later, faint footsteps came from outside the dense forest. Obviously, those Atlanteans could no longer hold back. Lorne's eyelids jumped, took a deep breath, and suddenly raised his voice. Everyone, come in and make a break quickly. I'll wait for you here, and I promise not to run away. Suddenly, the footsteps outside the dense forest paused again, and no new steps were taken. Time passed bit by bit, and it was unknown whether it was a short moment or a long few hours. The forging flames finally went out, and the broken wings of Icarus had perfectly blended the other two materials, presenting a brand new appearance. Lorne heaved a sigh of relief, glanced at the still motionless entrance to the dense forest behind him, and couldn't help but tease. I gave you a chance, but you are useless. However, just as Lorne was secretly mocking, something strange happened. Buzz buzz buzz. In the dull and oppressive hum of the air, the magic power around gathered madly above the dense forest, forming another tide that stretched for several kilometers. A water blue trident with a murderous aura appeared in the sky, and the powerful power was enough to blow the entire deserted island into pieces. They may not be able to tell whether the opponent has an ambush or not, but smart people have smart routines, and stupid people have stupid ways. If you put your hand into the hole, you can't catch the mouse hiding in the dark, and you may get bitten. Then just open the whole mouse hole. At this moment, Lorne, realizing that something was wrong, felt his scalp tingling under this ritual spell that contained the power of Poseidon. He picked up the wings of Icarus in front of him without hesitation, attached it to his back, and injected magic power crazily. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. As the aqua blue trident fell from the sky, Lorne, who had finally completed the last step, immediately vibrated the wings of Icarus behind him and soared into the sky. Boom, boom, boom. There were bursts of explosions, the earth shook, the entire island was torn apart, and a graceful figure flew towards the vast sea of the Oceanus Sea with the wind. Damn it. Let this bastard get away again. After returning in vain again, the two demigods who worked together to cast the ritual spell had blood in their pupils and gnashed their teeth in anger, but they could only jump in vain on the island that was constantly disintegrating and falling. Get on board. At this moment, a rough voice came from the sea. Another demigod vice captain who had escorted the wounded earlier was driving a shuttle-shaped warship pulled by several sea beasts and waved to the shore. The people on the island were overjoyed and immediately jumped onto the warship, starting the endless competition again. Thanks to readers Koi_TW, Diablo is really lucky. I'm annoyed that I have no talent. I'm a monster. Zimangilan, Zeus and Semele, Wasteland Law. Kinayushen_. It is Junine KO is not win Belgrass, Zinglan brilliant, etc. for the rewards, monthly tickets and recommendations. There are too many people who support it. I can't list them one by one. Please understand. I love you. I will update 2 chapters slowly today and continue to update 3 chapters tomorrow. Chapter 29. Do you want to die? Or do you not want to live? On the Sea of Oceanus, the howling winds tore apart the clouds, and the surging waves pushed forward like an overwhelming force. Several giant sea beasts resembling mako sharks shook their crescent-shaped tail fins under the dark waves, pulling up ropes made of water, dragging the swordfish-like warships on the sea. With the help of wind and waves, they cut through the waves and swept forward at a rapid speed. Southwest star position, 800 meters away, shoot at a 45-degree angle, and fire. Under the command of Vice Captain Andrew, the 6 Atlantis Golden Guards who were still able to fight immediately bent their bows and arrows and shot a round of arrows at the target in the air. It's really haunting. Sensing the sharp sound of breaking through the air behind him, Lorne frowned and cursed inwardly. He decisively adjusted the strength of the magic output, controlled the Icarus wings behind him to change the height and posture, and flexibly dodged the arrows that attacked one after another. However, just as he was making an evasive move, the 2 demigods standing on the bow also tacitly placed 2 gold and bronze arrows with delicate wave patterns and faintly shining stars on the bowstrings, and pulled the bronze longbows to the full. A familiar and strong sense of crisis instantly boiled in Lorne's heart, making his scalp tingle instinctively. Allah steel secret arrow. Coming again! Exclamation mark. Almost at the moment when this thought came to Lorne's mind, the air behind him had already made a shrill whimper, and the cold edge blocked his space for rise and fall, and the crisis was imminent. Using the first round of arrow rain from the Golden Guards to force the target to expose its flaws, the demigod master seized the opportunity and used the Allah steel secret arrow with superior armor-piercing performance to shoot the truly deadly second round of arrow rain. It must be said that after the running in of this chase, this Atlantis guard is also growing rapidly and forming a more tacit cooperation. But their opponents are also not standing still. At the critical moment, Lorne suddenly withdrew the magic power supply to one side of the wing of Icarus. Under the rapid change of airflow, his body turned in the air and narrowly avoided the attack from 2 secret arrows of Orichalcum steel. It's my turn. At the same time, Lorne narrowed his eyes, pulled out the old bronze sword from the magic array in front of him, and threw it violently. Swish. The sword made a sharp whistle and broke through the air. The two demigods subconsciously burst out their divine power, propped up a sea blue light curtain at the bow, and kept the sword out. Crack. The two collided, and a crisp shattering sound followed. This is. Captain Darkness suddenly looked up and saw that on the bronze sword covered with cracks, someone had drawn several overlapping Hermes characters with divine blood at some point, and their meaning was explosion. At the same time, a dazzling stream of light burst out from the cracks of the bronze sword, and thousands of blade fragments shot out, turning into an indestructible metal jet at close range. Puff puff puff. At the moment of contact, the sea blue light screen covering the hull was completely shattered. Damn it. The two demigods, who were caught off guard, had their pupils twitched, and could only hastily forcefully prop up the second barrier to protect the people around them. Boom. The exposed warships and sea beasts pulling the boats were instantly beaten into sieves by the violent metal jets, and then annihilated in a gorgeous explosion and fire. Finally got rid of it. Seeing that the biggest threat to the escape was destroyed, and the distance between him and the group of Atlantis guards was successfully opened, Lorne breathed a sigh of relief. Crack. However, before he could catch his breath, a crisp cracking sound echoed in his ears. His body, which was suspended in midair, paused, and he turned his head stiffly to look behind him. I saw several radioactive cracks spreading on the wings of Icarus. It was obvious that after a series of wind pressure changes and high-intensity magic conversion, it had reached its limit and could no longer bear the burden. It was on the verge of destruction. It was indeed a product of the friendship pool. With this quality, it was a pitfall. At this moment, Lorne was a little bit in tears. As he gradually lost control of the wind, he had to give up the plan to cross the Oceanus Sea directly and find a nearby island to land. Fortunately, there is always a way out. When the wings of Icarus was about to completely collapse, a lush island came into view. In the center of the island, there were several dilapidated marble buildings, like some kind of ancient temple, and an obscure atmosphere was surging in the earth veins. And between the collapsed pillars and damaged stone sculptures in the square, there were dozens of black spots busy. Temple. Someone. Lorne's eyes fixed, and he instinctively became alert, but at this moment, he could no longer think about it, and could only fold his wings and fall into a relatively remote forest on the island. At the same time, on a marble square. What? Exclamation mark. A bald and strong man with a face full of flesh and a short and sturdy middle-aged man in a felt hat felt a vibration under their feet, and they raised their heads at the same time, their eyes meeting in the southwest of the island. Then, the two looked at each other, and the bald and strong man who took the lead spoke first in a deep voice. Zust, go and take a look. This is not good, right? The short and sturdy middle-aged man in the felt hat looked at the stones and sculptures being cut and moved around, as well as several old items that were quite old, that were scooped out from the ruined temple. He couldn't help but rubbed his hands with a dry smile, and his slender eyes revealed a strong greed. Don't worry, your share will be included, the bald and strong man promised with a cold face, and when he saw that the middle-aged man's feet had not moved for a long time, he raised a finger impatiently. Add another 10% at most. If you don't want to do it, there are plenty of people who will. I'll do it. I'll do it. Noticing that the bald man was a little annoyed, the middle-aged man in the felt hat nodded with a smile on his face and agreed. Then he turned into a residual shadow and moved to the southwest of the island, where the movement came from, watching the other party gradually go farther and farther away, and finally disappearing from sight. The scarred young man standing behind the bald man spoke rather indignantly, revealing his standard bronze armor under his coarse cloth collar. Boss, we are obviously the ones who are doing the most. Why does he get so much? Why don't I follow and kill this guy? Shut up, idiot. Do you really think you are still in Seraphis? The bald man glared at the scarred young man behind him, lowered his voice, and snorted coldly. Do you think I don't want to? But there is no one to lead the way, and there is no accurate chart of the Oceanus Sea. Are you sure you can get ashore alive? What's the point of getting more money? The key is to live to spend it. Under the boss's scolding, the young and energetic scarred young man glanced at the figures mixed in the crowd around him, who were dressed the same as the middle-aged man in the felt hat, and couldn't help but lower his head in dissatisfaction. He could only spit a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground to vent his dissatisfaction. Bah. A bunch of Arcadian garbage. Thieves who are greedy for money. Legend has it that the messenger of god Hermes was born in a cave in Arcadia and is a widely circulated patron saint of the local area. Perhaps influenced by this god, the people of Arcadia are cunning, and it is a paradise where thieves, merchants, and swindlers gather together to celebrate. Of course, those favored by Hermes would more or less receive some blessings from the messenger, so they were agile, good at hiding, and were first-class players in exploring and delivering messages. The middle-aged man in the felt hat named Zeus was the best among them because he had the blood of Hermes. However, he was also famous for his greed. If it weren't for the extremely high risk and reward of this mission, they would not bring such a money-minded guy. In addition, there were other factors for everyone to live in peace. For example, as a demigod for many years, the bold strong man himself was not sure to subdue Zeus, who inherited Hermes' extreme speed with one blow, not to mention the deputy who had just entered the demigod behind him. They were not actually bandits, but the strongest elite that Seriphus could gather, carrying the king's important commission, and could not afford to make mistakes. Once the two sides tore their faces, it would be good for no one. Okay, stop talking nonsense, and get to work. The bald man calmed down his thoughts, and waved his hand to give orders. The dozen or so people around him who were responsible for guarding and laboring could not help but speed up the progress of the transportation. Seeing the stone slabs and sculptures engraved with ancient secret codes being sent to the ship, the man's mood, which was originally caused by the bleeding of cutting flesh, was relieved a lot. Although this mission did not find the divine blood that His Majesty the King wanted most, it was an unexpected gain to find an abandoned temple on this deserted island. As long as these and that thing can be safely transported to shore, it will be enough to make up for the losses and mistakes of this trip and make everyone a fortune. While thinking about the carefree days after returning to the city, the bald man couldn't help but look at the sculptures around him. For some reason, he always felt that these sculptures on the island were weird, like living people were forcibly stuffed into the stone shell. A gust of cold wind blew, and the bald man couldn't help but shivered, subconsciously shrank his neck, and urged, "Hurry up. Make sure to load everything that can be loaded onto the ship before dark. As soon as Zeus comes back, we will return immediately." Everyone looked at the sun sinking into the sea, and quickened their hands. About a quarter of an hour later, the bald strong man who was pacing in place couldn't help feeling anxious. Strange, why is there still no news from Zeus after so long? Could it be? In a flash, the bald strong man extinguished the groundless speculation in his heart and comforted himself. How is it possible? The blood of Hermes is the best at running away. As long as he wants to escape, almost no one can catch him. Well, he must have been delayed by something. Let's wait and see. Soon, the bald strong man calmed down and continued to command his men to search for the secret treasures of the abandoned temple on the island. At the same time, in the dim forest, a descendant of Hermes looked at the dozens of exploding runes flickering faintly under his feet, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. "Don't move, or it will explode." A kind reminder came. In the deep pit ahead, the fallen corpse that had originally attracted all of Zeus's attention was slowly getting up from the ground, turning around to shake off the dust and dead leaves on his body, and smiled at him, showing his 8 neat and white teeth. "So, do you want to die? Or do you not want to live?" Zeus opened his mouth silently after hearing the two options, and his expression froze. "I won't divide the big chapter into 3,000 words, and there will be another 3,000 words in the afternoon, to ensure that today's 6,000 word update will be completed before 8 o'clock. Chapter 30 Chaos is the ladder. So, you are the fleet commissioned by the king of Seriphus Island to explore this abandoned temple on the sea." A quarter of an hour later, Lorne raised his hand and stroked his chin, glancing at the middle-aged man in a felt hat who was crying and explaining his origins and identity in front of him, and his eyes narrowed quietly. "Seriphus Island? This name seems to have some impression, as if I have heard it somewhere. Little brother, I have said everything I should say, I'm just a guide." Seeing that the other side had no intention of letting him go, Zeus begged with a sad face, and at the same time, in order to eliminate the other side's concerns, he swore to the sky with a serious face. Don't worry, I know the rules. I didn't see anything, and I don't know anything. Lorne, who came back to his senses, couldn't help but laugh at this situation. Hey, you are an expert, brother. It seems that you have encountered this kind of thing many times. Zeus coughed a few times to cover up his embarrassment, squeezed out a flattering smile on his face, and leaned forward slightly. Ahem, isn't it all just to make a living? There's no need to risk your life. So, Lorne spoke leisurely, looking at the middle-aged man's hand that had touched his lower back with a smile. How many people who believed your words are still alive? Discovered. In an instant, Zeus's pupils shrank, and he immediately jumped up. His right hand quickly pulled out a dagger from his lower back, and the sharp blade slashed towards Lorne's throat with a whimpering sound. The middle-aged man in the felt hat, who had been timid at this moment, moved quickly and viciously, with a sinister and cold look, just like a cheetah that suddenly showed its ferocious fangs. Sure enough, how could the demigod descendants of Hermes be innocent and pure little white rabbits? And the messenger of God they believed in was a well-known fraudster and thief throughout Greece. Lorne raised the corners of his lips without surprise, and a sneer appeared on his face. Crack. The crisp sound of breaking echoed in the dense forest. The right hand holding the dagger twisted several creepy arcs like a twist, and 3 pieces of white bone stubble pierced through the flesh and exposed. Ouch. The blood of Hermes almost fell to the ground as the pain hit. If you move again, Zeus can't save you. The faint voice sounded in his ears. Zeus was startled and bit his tongue quickly, forcing himself to wake up, stop leaning forward, and stand still to avoid triggering the explosive rune under his feet. Quick reaction. You are worthy of being the blood of Hermes, the god of speed. With a half smile teasing, Lorne started to approach. One hand gently rested on the other's right shoulder, and the other hand took over the bronze dagger that slipped from the palm of the middle-aged man in the felt hat. I just wanted to play a joke on you. How can this little trick compare to yours? Zeus endured the severe pain of the fracture, and his facial features were almost twisted into a ball. He squeezed out a few difficult dry laughs, flattered with a sad face, and cursed in his heart. What kind of monster did I run into today? Not only was he full of bad water, but his reaction speed was even faster than that of him, a descendant of Hermes. If this is your last words, I will take it as a compliment for the time being. Lorne smiled with his eyes narrowed. The bronze dagger with a blue blade, which seemed to be poisoned, flew flexibly between his slender fingers. As mentioned before, there is a gap between demigods. The blood of gods often becomes thinner with the iteration of offspring. Although he is not very willing to admit it, he is also the first generation of Zeus's offspring, and what he faced on the Sea of Oceanus were also high purity mixed blood gods and titans. It is impossible to trick a demigod like this one who is related to Hermes, and has been in the mortal world for who knows how many generations. His ability is almost entirely focused on agility. As the blue blade approached his neck little by little, Zeus's face turned green, and he shuddered and hurriedly explained. It was a misunderstanding just now. If you let me go, I can lead you. To be honest, the group of people from Seriphus found a lot of good things on this island this time. Seeing that Lorne had no intention of being tempted by this windfall, the descendant of Hermes with cold sweat on his forehead simply made up his mind, gritted his teeth decisively, and showed his trump card. Well, let me tell you a secret. The king of Seriphus sent us here, not just to explore the temple, but what he really wants is a legendary, divine blood, elixir, that can transform mortals and greatly extend their lifespan. Even if you are a demigod, after taking it, your strength will have a qualitative leap. In a trance, Lorne was startled, and pieces of information intertwined in his mind. Divine blood, that transforms mortals. Elixir that extends lifespan, and Seriphus Island. In an instant, there was a flash of lightning in his mind, and Lorne's pupils shrank slightly, and a name came out of his mouth. Gorgon. You know? The opposite side of him was also shocked, with a look of surprise. Lorne did not answer, his brows knitted, and his thoughts turned rapidly in his mind. He finally remembered why Seriphus Island sounded so familiar, because it was the second home of Perseus. That is, the famous demigod Hera of ancient Greece who would step on the invisible island in the future, kill the Gorgon Medusa, defeat Keto, the mother of sea monsters, and save the Ethiopian princess Andromeda. In terms of blood relationship, this person is also the half-brother of Lorne. According to legend, King Acrisius of Argos learned from the gods that he would be killed by the son born to his daughter Danae, so he imprisoned his daughter in a bronze tower. Zeus and the underworld turned into golden rain to meet Danae and gave birth to Perseus. The king of Argos was horrified when he learned that his daughter was pregnant and gave birth to a child. He put Perseus and his mother Danae in a box and threw them into the sea. But with the blessing of Zeus, the mother and son drifting in the sea safely passed through the wind and waves. Finally, the box they lived in was washed up on the island of Seriphus. The two brothers Dictys and Polydectes, who ruled the island, took in the mother and son and raised Perseus. But soon, the elder brother Polydectes coveted Danae's beauty and wanted to drive out Perseus, who was gradually growing up and showing supernatural powers and posing a threat to him. Therefore, on the day when Perseus presented him with a gift, the ruler of Seriphus Island expressed his wish to obtain the head of Medusa, one of the three Gorgon sisters, with ill intentions. So Perseus was forced to embark on the journey, and this is how the story came about. However, if you think about it carefully, there seems to be a big deviation between the records in the myth and what Lorne saw. The ruler of Seriphus Island was definitely not a temporary decision. In order to make things difficult for his adopted son Perseus, he chose to let him go to the invisible island to hunt down the Gorgon Medusa and retrieve her head. Instead, he had been coveting the three Gorgon sisters for a long time. Of course, to be more precise, what he wanted was probably the Gorgon blood flowing in the three sisters. In Greek mythology, Gorgon is the collective name of three snake-haired demons, namely, the eldest sister, the daughter of strength Stheno, the second sister, the daughter of flight Uriel, and the youngest sister, the daughter of domination Medusa. According to rumors, the blood on the right side of the three Gorgon sisters has the magical effect of resurrecting the dead and prolonging the lifespan of mortals, while the blood on the left side is a rapidly fatal poison. Perseus set foot on the invisible island and, with the help of fate, killed Medusa, the only one of the three sisters who could not live forever, and took off her head, but directly presented it to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. Athena fixed Medusa's head in the center of her sheepskin shield, making it her emblem. Later, Asclepius, the god of medicine and son of Apollo, received a small bottle of restorative blood from Athena and created a magical medicine that made people immortal. In the end, he violated the taboos of the gods and was killed by thunder by the king of gods Zeus. From this, the powerful effect of Gorgon blood can be seen. It seems that even the immortal gods are afraid of it, not to mention the mortals who are trapped in the suffering of birth, aging, illness and death. Before, Lorne took a glance from a distance and saw a group of human sculptures in the abandoned temple square. They were probably the human warriors who coveted the magical effect of Gorgon blood. These overconfident hunters misjudged their strength and became prey. They all turned into stone sculptures on this island, waiting for the years to sink. Lorne glanced at the middle-aged man in a felt hat beside him, and his eyes were thoughtful. It turned out that the king of Seriphus, the adoptive father of the demigod hero Perseus, had been harassing the three Gorgon sisters a long time ago. However, his repeated attempts ended in failure, and he turned to his adopted son Perseus. According to the process and results of the battle, Perseus at that time had to be promoted to a demigod at least, so that he could escape from the Oceanus Sea alive after killing Medusa, who was also a demigod, and facing the pursuit of two divine-level Gorgons, Stheno and Uriel. At least for now, Perseus has not grown to this point. Unexpectedly, among the 12 mortal female heirs destined by Zeus, the fifth son of Semele actually advanced to a demigod earlier than the fourth son of Danae, Perseus. It seems that my growth rate is indeed a bit extraordinary, but for the sake of my life, I should be careful to hide when I enter the city in the future. So you know it too, that's even better. At this time, the descendant of Hermes who came to his senses first put away the astonishment on his face and showed a surprised expression. Lorne smiled and stabilized the blade turning on his fingertips, but did not pull it away. This bit of information is not worth buying your life. No, no. Zeus shook his head repeatedly, looked around with a sly look, and after confirming that there was no one, he whispered mysteriously, I want to say, I can help you get the blood of Gorgon. At this time, hearing this unexpected good news, Lorne's smile became even brighter. What is the priesthood of Hermes? The god of fraud, lies, business, and theft. If the other side had this ability, the ruler of Seriphus Island who issued the bounty would have gotten what he wanted long ago, and there would be no future demigod hero Perseus. If you are still not honest at this time, just as Lorne's fingertips holding the dagger were slightly raised, the sound of huge waves came from the distant shore. The familiar smell of the sea that permeated made his eyelids jump. Boss Zeus, are you there? The goods are almost loaded. The boss asked me to ask you if you have encountered any troubles. When can we set off? At the same time, a few trembling shouts came from outside the dense forest. Two Hermes believers, also wearing felt hats and cloaks, were walking in cautiously. Lorne's eyelids twitched a few more times, and he couldn't help but secretly complain in his heart. There are wolves in front and tigers behind, and there are 3 Gorgon sisters hiding somewhere on the island. How unlucky. However, think about it in a different way. Perhaps, the crisis is brewing a turning point, and chaos may be the ladder. Lorne's eyes swept from the front and back. A bright and mysterious smile appeared on his face, and he warmly reached out to hook the shoulder of the Hermes descendant, and whispered in the man's ear, "Do you want to do something bigger? For example, the two of us eat all the goods." Hiss. Zuster took a deep breath at such a crazy idea, then looked down at the poisoned dagger that was getting closer and closer to his neck, nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice, and made a very smooth choice. A big chapter of 3,600 words is presented. Today's 6,000 words have been exceeded. Please recommend, support and vote. Continue tomorrow and strive to reach the full 6,000 words. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 31. What is a master of fanning the flames? Arms on hips. In front of the abandoned temple, dozens of people were busy loading the loot onto the boat. The bald man who was in charge of the supervision kept glancing at the dense forest on the distant coast. His eyebrows gradually twisted. Because the demigod of Hermes had not returned for a long time, he was uneasy and sent 2 more people to investigate the situation. However, until now, there was still no movement on the other side. At dusk, the dense forest near the sea was like a monster lurking in the darkness, chewing and devouring life, which made people shudder. Just as the bald man was hesitant, there was a sudden explosion of thunder in the silence. Boom. Several blazing flames rose from the depths of the dense forest, and the violent shockwave that formed in an instant swept in all directions, destroying the grass and trees wherever it passed, and turning the rocks into powder, forming a huge mushroom cloud that could be seen with the naked eye and expanded rapidly. Even though they were half an island away, the deafening explosion and the shaking ground still made many people in the square stagger. Bang, bang. With the dull sound of heavy objects falling to the ground, 2 figures thrown out by the airwave like broken sacks climbed up from the ground in a panic. One of them had a bloody face and a panicked look. The other was Zeus, who had lost contact before. At this moment, the right arm of the demigod of Hermes was strangely twisted, and his abdomen was stabbed. Blood with a hint of golden red flowed out from several tragic wounds. There was almost no blood and vitality on his pale face. Bastard, don't try to run. At the same time, a roar of boiling murderous intent came from behind, accompanied by the sound of surging waves, and several dark blue tridents whistled in. Get down. In an instant, the follower with the bloody face shuddered and roared hard, and at the same time threw Zeus, who was half dead beside him, to the ground and rolled forward. Puff, puff, puff. Before the people in front could react, the dark blue trident that broke through the air passed over the heads of the 2 men and landed in the square, causing blood and wailing. Just as the scene was in chaos, the follower with blood on his face dragged the half-dead Zeus to his feet quickly and rushed into his own camp before the next wave of attacks arrived. The quick reaction made people sigh that he was worthy of being a believer of Hermes, the god of speed. What are you doing? Are you waiting to die? Help. Kill these robbers. As the rapid shouts came into their ears, the people who were suddenly attacked in the square woke up, as if from a dream. Zeus, who was trying to find out the situation, ended up in such a miserable state, coupled with the wailing of his accomplices around him, and the strong smell of blood in the air, they subconsciously stirred up their magic power, and showed their weapons. At this moment, the several sea blue shadows chasing in the air seemed to be frightened by the momentum in the square. They suddenly paused, and their lips and tongues moved, as if they wanted to speak. Don't let them cast a spell. A timely reminder came from the crowd, and the figure who raised his arms and shouted was the first to throw out the dagger in his hand, signaling a charge. There are fewer people on the other side, shoulder to shoulder. Following the demonstration of the leader, the people who were already nervous to the extreme after being attacked followed suit, each taking out a javelin, a crossbow, and a short axe to greet. The pursuers who would not sit still and wait for death also subconsciously fought back. For a while, the two teams that met in the square fought each other completely, and the battle became more and more intense as the weapons clashed, and the blood continued to splash. However, no one noticed that the hero who initially boosted morale and a half-dead Herm's bloodline had disappeared in the melee. Similarly, no one noticed that the scarlet color on the square was fading unconsciously, and the blood spilled under their feet was quietly seeping to the ground in the darkness. At this moment, in the southeast of the invisible island, a short and sturdy figure, holding his lower abdomen, that was constantly dripping with blood, staggered to the shore and fumbled out a rope tied to the reef from the sand and pulled it hard. A moment later, a small sealer boat slowly came from the reef. Fortunately, they are all there. Under the night, Zeus looked at the deep water line of the hull, breathed a sigh of relief, and sat down on the sand almost exhausted. And as the body and mind relaxed, all kinds of uncontrollable tingling came like a tide. Zeus couldn't help but gasp. His face twisted, and he cursed a certain culprit in his heart. This bastard is really vicious. If I hadn't pretended to be dead and got away with it just now, maybe I would have been silenced by now. The demigod of the Hermes family who survived the catastrophe could not help but feel a chill on his back when he thought of the thrilling scene just now, and was even more grateful for his witty choice. Although he teamed up with outsiders and played a role in a group of his teammates, it was forced by the situation. After all, his life was in the hands of the other party, and he had no choice. If you disagree, the two fellow countrymen in the dense forest, who were basically familiar with each other, are the best example. Of course, even if this set of rhetoric is thrown out, betrayal is absolutely intolerable for most teams. Moreover, both sides have lost so many people because of their conspiracy. No matter which side wins in the end, he doesn't think he will have a good ending when they calm down and think about the process and find out the crux and problems. Instead of staying here and waiting to die, it is better to make a fortune and run away as soon as possible. At most, he can change his name. Looking at the deep draft of the boat in front of him, Zeus's lips curled up with pleasure, and his face was full of pride. This is the boat he secretly prepared for himself, in order to avoid the bald man from killing the donkey after it has done its job. Inside, there is also a separate harvest, all of which are the best things. As a grey area practitioner who hates people and dogs, he is mixed with a bunch of violent element who lick blood on the edge of the knife all day long. How can he live long without leaving a way out for himself? Zeus turned his head and looked at the temple square on the island, where the sound of fighting came from. With a mocking look, staggered to his feet and climbed onto his own boat. However, due to excessive blood loss and his body being too weak, he staggered and almost fell back into the sea from the bow. Fortunately, a hand stretched out from the darkness and pulled him back to the boat, and the earnest admonition sounded in his ears. I told you to be careful. Thank you. The subconscious response stopped abruptly. Zeus, who was trying to adjust his posture, turned his neck stiffly and looked at the nightmare that appeared in front of him like a ghost in the night, smiling at him. Finally, he couldn't help but feel a sore nose, and his voice almost brought out tears. Why are you here? I'm worried about you. Lorne smiled and complained with concern. You're half dead, and you're still running so far. What if you run into danger? Danger? Who on this island could be more dangerous than you? Exclamation mark. Zeus couldn't help but complain in anger, and he had an urge to jump off the boat and run away immediately, but the oars that pushed the boat out of the water had already pushed it to the deep sea far away from the shore. As the bones in his right arm that had not yet been reset and the wound on his stomach that almost cut him alive came with a tearing pain, he slumped on the side of the ship and his nose seemed to be even more sour. What escape master? What superior skills? It's all an illusion. When he thought about how he crawled out of the bloody square, dragged his half-dead body, and moved to this coast little by little, thinking that he was superior skills, but in the end he was jumping under the other party's nose the whole time. Zeus's back felt cold, and he couldn't help feeling a little sad and angry. The other party clearly knew that he had pretended to be dead and ran away during the chaos and was just deliberately playing with him. However, although he wanted to chop the other party into pieces and throw them into the sea to feed the fish, Zeus still pulled a professional fake smile from his face smoothly and took the initiative to offer a wave of courtesy. You are right. This is the boat I prepared for you to leave the island. There is also a generous gift inside, all of which are the best goods on this island. The demigod opened his mouth and showed the eloquence inherited from his ancestor Hermes. He forcibly beautified his behavior of deserting the battlefield and embezzling treasures as thoughtful consideration for Lorne. Then, he paused, looked at the temple square where the sound of fighting seemed to be weakened, and spoke carefully. Let's go now, shall we? Although he successfully tricked both parties through a wave of superb acting skills and just the right information gap. But as long as you calm down and think about it carefully, many details cannot withstand scrutiny. Moreover, the disappearance of their two fuses is almost a loophole that cannot be remedied. By then, when the other side reacts, they may face the pursuit of not only one side, but both sides. Lorne smiled, still rowing the oars slowly, without any impatience. He looked at the island that was gradually moving away and raised the corners of his lips. I forgot to tell you that I did something else before I caught up with you. What? Zeus was slightly stunned and asked subconsciously. Snap. Lorne let go of the oars, raised his right hand, and snapped his fingers. Boom. In an instant, a violent explosion came from the other side of the island. The deep blue water rushed up to the sky, countless wood chips flew, and a broken warship slowly sank into the deep sea with billowing smoke. At the same time, the bald man who had just hesitated on the temple square saw this situation and his eyes were bloodshot. Ship. They destroyed our ship. And everything. For a moment, a strong murderous aura spread, and the clanging sound of armor rubbing against each other was endless. Their true identity was not bandits, but the regular army of Seriphus. If they failed to retrieve the blood of Gorgon, and failed to obtain the corresponding harvest, to compensate for the losses at sea, and their only means of transportation are destroyed, their next fate can be imagined. Since they won't let us live, the other side won't have an easy life either. The remaining warriors around were excited, and they tore off their coats, revealing the standard armor inside, and roared angrily. Fight. Fight them. At this moment, several Atlantis guards who were already dizzy in the fight, just looked numb and confused, and their bodies mechanically and instinctively met the human soldiers who rushed over to fight them desperately. Chapter 32 Lali, I really haven't kidnapped her. TSK, two demigods, a group of gold, and they know how to cooperate? Is this the regular army of Seriphus? Lorne, paddling on the edge, felt the crazy turbulent ether tide on the island, slowed down the speed of paddling, and glanced at Zeus beside him with a smile. It seems that His Majesty the King has really invested a lot in this. Zeus, who realized that he could no longer get off the pirate ship, had a sad face, nodded helplessly, and told all the information he knew about this exploration. It turned out that with the growth of his adopted son Perseus and his extraordinary talent, coupled with his own aging, the ruler of Seriphus Island had already felt urgent pressure and danger. After all, Greece has a fine tradition of killing his father to ascend to the throne. So he issued rewards one after another and sent people to find the legendary blood of Gorgon. But most of the conventional civilian forces never returned. Finally, the king of Seriphus, who could no longer wait, gathered all the forces in his hands and hired the followers of Hermes as guides at a high price and directly bet everything on this exploration. However, the result might disappoint him. The fleet that landed on the island searched the entire abandoned temple, but failed to find the legendary Gorgon. Boom. The violent explosion on the island interrupted Zeus's story. The dazzling flames shot up into the sky, and broken arms and limbs flew around. Seeing the tragic battle and the terrifying destructive power of both sides, Zeus swallowed his saliva and his face turned pale. Who are those people who are chasing you? Atlantis guards. Hiss. Hearing the careless answer, the demigod of Hermes broke out in cold sweat, and complained in his heart. This time, not only did he pit the Seraphis, his employer, but he also got in trouble with the Atlanteans, who were rampant on the sea. If he thought about his life, he would have to say goodbye to going out to sea to make a living. At this moment, with the strong vibrations coming one after another, the entire sea surface began to sway with huge waves, and the boat they were riding on was swaying from side to side, and the ether factor content in the air was also rising. Luon's eyebrows twisted into a ball, and gradually restrained the smile on his face. Something was wrong. Those Atlanteans had been crippled by him, so they shouldn't be so strong. And the source of the vibration didn't seem to come from the ground, but underground? Exclamation mark. After a brief pause, he seemed to think of something, and suddenly looked up at the shaking island. Boom. At the same time, a roar of heaven and earth exploded, and the hideous cracks in the ground tore the entire island apart, as if leading directly to the abyss where the underworld was. The rustling sound of snakes climbing, and the hissing of their tongues came in the darkness, like steel needles, piercing everyone's hearts and eardrums. Panic, despair, and all kinds of negative emotions spread uncontrollably. Then, two hideous and huge shadows gradually emerged in the thick night. It was a magical beast with a purple snake tail in the lower half and a human female in the upper half. It was a goddess with golden wings on her back, and a cold and beautiful face. Gorgon. Bang. The claws covered with snake scales crossed the abyss, and climbed onto the broken temple square. The two towering figures like hills rose higher. The other magic factor, that was frantically converging towards the invisible island, was excited, and active in the air. The purple-red light produced by the fierce friction illuminated most of the dark sky. In an instant, the powerful magic reaction made Lorne's eyelids jump on the sea, and goosebumps exploded on his back. God level 2. He turned his head to look at Zeus beside him and spoke dryly. Are you sure you're here to hunt them? I don't know. The higher-ups said they were just gods and monsters that escaped from the Erema crypt, at most demigods. The demigod descendant of Hermes also swallowed his saliva wildly, his upper and lower teeth chattering uncontrollably, with a look of horror on his face. Two demigods, plus a pile of gold, and a demigod descendant of Hermes as an external aid, the SYNOPSIS is definitely enough to deal with three gods and monsters that are also at most demigods. Unless, at this time, the two Gorgons on the island, who had transformed into their full forms, had already launched a bloody massacre against the intruders. Buzz 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 buzz. Dense purple-red beams of light swept across the sky, falling to the ground like a meteor shower, and the entire temple square was exploded several times in an instant. Red and black scorched earth mixed with flesh and blood fell, and wisps of green smoke rose from the cone-shaped pit that was tens of meters deep. With just this one blow, 7 or 8 people from Seraphis and Atlantis were instantly wiped out. These survivors are all genuine gold-level elites. That old coffin good on Seraphis Island actually played a trick on me. At this time, after witnessing the tragic situation on the island, and experiencing a flash of lightning in his mind, Zeus, who felt a chill on his back, couldn't help but start cursing. Not necessarily. A low voice on the side pulled Zeus back to reality in panic, muttering faintly, "It is possible that when they first landed on this island, they were only demigods, but in order to fight against the constant pursuit and to survive, just before you arrived, they successfully broke through their original ranks, and were upgraded to complete gods." As for the specific reasons, Lorne also vaguely guessed it, based on a few things he had taken from the Seraphis warship before. He opened the magic circle, took out a few stone slabs engraved with wavy secret texts, took a deep look at the unrecognizable abandoned temple on the island, and his lips and teeth moved silently. The old sea god Pontus, I didn't expect that this was actually his former temple, but after careful calculation, this is not surprising. After all, since the fall of this ancient god, he has been a Greek model worker. Not only has he exploded gold coins everywhere, but he has also greatly enriched the ecology of the original ocean, leaving behind endless legacy. I'm afraid that the three Gorgon sisters, who were originally hunted and conquered everywhere, were able to successfully advance on this invisible island with almost nothing except waves and stones, because they licked the bag of the old sea god Pontus and inherited part of the ocean's grace. Therefore, in Greek mythology, the three Gorgon sisters have two speculations about their identity origins: the daughter of the demon ancestor Typhon and the snake mother Echidna, and the daughter of the father of all monsters Phorcys and the mother of sea monsters Keto. By the way, although in name, the father of all monsters Phorcys and the mother of sea monsters Keto are the children of the old sea god Pontus and the parents of the three Gorgon sisters, their blood and divinity seem to be purer than the three of them. However, the future demigod hero Perseus only used the head of Medusa to turn the so-called mother of sea monsters Keto into stone. Obviously, the three Gorgon sisters are the more perfect successors. At this time, Lorne looked at the two Gorgon banshees who were constantly emitting divine pressure on the island, and began to violently clear the area, and couldn't help but feel a little scared. The constant pursuit and harassment from the outside world has made the three sisters deeply wary and hostile to outsiders. Not long ago, after obtaining the legacy of the old sea god Pontus in some way, they did not disappear, but just hid in the underground of the temple to sleep, waiting for promotion. And those outsiders who broke into their territory happened to run into the muzzle of the gun and woke them up in advance. Fortunately, they didn't rush up to get close to them at the first time, otherwise they might not know how they died. Lorne was once again grateful for his wisdom and caution, and at the same time grabbed the oars, ready to evacuate this dangerous area as soon as possible. Even if he wanted to build a good relationship with the three Gorgon sisters, now is not the time. Save your life first, and talk about it later. While thinking, Lorne increased the speed of rowing. However, as the sound of waves spread and touched the island, his heart suddenly shrank, and a sudden strong sense of crisis arose. He was like a frog being stared at by a poisonous snake in the dark, and the piercing coldness instantly spread throughout his body. "Get down!" With a low roar, Lorne, whose face changed, threw himself down without hesitation. Almost at the same time, the snake-like vertical pupils flashed with madness and anger, and looked at the sea surface coldly. When their eyes met, the unprepared Souster suddenly felt his body sink, and his consciousness continued to fall and sink in the darkness. The next moment, the purple-red magic eye opened and closed, and a beam of magic power compressed to the extreme swept across the sea, raising huge waves, and the sea surface fell into chaos and darkness. Finally, the night ended, and the day dawned. The turbulence and chaos of the deep sea were washed away with a ray of sunlight rising in the morning. Splash! With a crisp sound of water coming out, the tall figure, who was soaked all over, flipped from the water to a small boat floating quietly on the sea surface. Ahem. Lorne lay on the deck, coughed slightly, then looked at the calm surroundings, and lay down exhausted, gasping for breath. Is this the gap between a demigod and a god? Isn't it too scary? After a short rest, Lorne stood up, while complaining in his heart. His wandering eyes looked at the half-broken human sculpture on the deck, and shook his head helplessly. "I told you to lie down, but you didn't listen. Now look, this time even Zeus can't save it." After a few seconds of silence for a certain unlucky descendant of Hermes, Lorne raised his hand, and threw the half-broken stone sculpture into the deep sea. He sat on the deck, and looked at the unfamiliar sea around him, feeling a little embarrassed. Without a guide, and no idea of the direction, where should he go now? As depression surged in his heart, Lorne couldn't help but complain about the culprits who caused this unprovoked accident. "Three sisters, I'm just passing by. Is it necessary to fire a map cannon at me?" Crack. Just as a victim was complaining in anger, a strange sound of shattering came from the cabin under his feet. Along with it, there was a familiar smell that made his blood pressure soar. Gorgon. Lorne turned his neck stiffly, forced a dry smile on his face, and looked at the open cabin behind him. His eyes gradually changed from hypocritical flattery to doubt, and finally to complex astonishment. In the deepest part of the cabin, the piles of secret stone slabs and bronze sacrificial vessels slid down, and a half-human high-purple-red giant cocoon revealed its outline, rising and falling with the frequency of breathing, and it sounded like a heartbeat. and inside it, a petite human figure was curled up in the fetal membrane with its arms clasped. The morning sun rose, and a ray of light shone into the dim cabin. In the purple-red cocoon membrane, a pair of eyes opened, as if they had sensed something, and the pure and unique rectangular pupils looked at the figure standing outside the fetal membrane. Lorne's mouth twitched slightly, and his thoughts were surging. He finally knew why only 2 of the 3 Gorgon witches showed up last night, and why the sisters went crazy, and slaughtered all the intruders on the island, and even opened fire on him. Now, it seems that he is in big trouble. The second update was released with 3k words, and 6k was completed today. Dear readers, please allow me to quibble. I didn't update more or less, but wrote long chapters to avoid incoherent plots, and facilitate your reading. The daily update is actually equivalent to 3 chapters of 2000 words. So, please don't feed the fish to death. I will try my best. Chapter 33. There are tens of thousands of sea gods. I can deal with half of them by myself. Poseidon, you scum. A low roar echoed on the sea, and Lorne on the deck raised his knife with a gloomy face. Bang! In an instant, blood splashed, and a fish head with eyes open rolled down from the side of the ship into the surging waves. Ding! Today's blasphemous task is completed. Bronze certificate +1 accompanied by a mechanical sound in the ocean of consciousness, and the 3 dots on the 12-sided dice in Lorne's mind went out, and a bronze badge fell into his hand. Ship, come on a Poseidon, or come on a Hermes. In the devilish muttering, the bronze badge was swallowed by the bronze altar transformed by the wheel of Hecate, and the static 12-sided dice above turned again, and finally stopped on the side engraved with 3 ripples. Congratulations on receiving a blessing from Poseidon, harvest fish tide. The anticipation and excitement that had just emerged on Lorne's face froze in an instant. He waved the kitchen knife with gritted teeth and viciously scraped the scales, and gutted the headless sea fish in his hand. His ferocious and gloomy expression was somewhat personal. Fish, eat your uncle. Rubbish lottery. Rubbish Poseidon. The blasphemer on the sea cursed inwardly, while sketching the triangular Hermes symbol representing fire in the air. With the flame rising, he roasted the fish meat that had been pierced on the dagger, until it sizzled with oil. There was no pause in that series of actions, which could be described as flowing smoothly. After all, he had been drifting on the sea for 7 days and 7 nights, and had been eating fish for a whole week. As a fishy smell rose from his churning stomach to his throat, Lorne couldn't help but frown and complain to the 12-sided dice in his mind. You've cheated me of so many chips, and you don't even have a guaranteed mechanism. Sooner or later, you'll be demolished. But the 12-sided dice on the altar trembled slightly, as if it understood the owner's accusation, and then it spun around, faintly emitting a certain mixed joyful emotion, and activated 3 silver grey oracles. Trial 1. Steal a golden sacrificial vessel from the temple of Hermes, fooling the god known for stealing. Trial 2. Destroy a marriage, causing the hostility of Hera, the protector of marriage. Trial 3. Lead Medusa to worship the temple of Athena, desecrating the sanctuary of the goddess of wisdom. Come on, if you are a man, face me head on. As the 3 updated Zhao Changban appeared in his mind, Luon bared his teeth, and felt a little liver pain. In the process of constantly accepting and completing tasks, his fate with the 12-sided dice in his mind became deeper and deeper, and this thing seems to be able to evolve. After contacting his own professional memories about games, it actually upgraded in the same way, gradually evolving in a more systematic and humane direction. Of course, considering the moral integrity of the gambling goddess, Luon did not think about giving this thing a humane destruction to eliminate future troubles. But whether he roasted it with fire and drowned it, or chopped it with a sword and struck it with lightning, he could not scrape off a bit of stone foam from this thing. Even if he threw it into the sea and then ran away immediately, it could automatically return to Luon's body and drag him to die wildly in the world of the gods. I was kidnapped by a dice. Who would believe this? Luon was complaining in his heart, while sensing the 3 refreshed Zhaoban tasks in his mind. He felt even more depressed. This week's mission was much more difficult than the last one. Just asking him to find the temples of the 3 main gods in this vast ocean was a difficult problem. Not to mention, being a minotaur under Hera's nose and putting on eye drops for Athena were both suicidal options. Therefore, He had reason to suspect that this cheating dice had deliberately targeted him by choosing these topics. Fortunately, he had completed 2 weekly missions at once, so he would have a corresponding 2-week protection period. At least for a short period of time, he didn't have to bite the bullet and take the initiative to hang around in front of the Olympian gods. But even if these cheating weekly missions could be slowed down, there were other big troubles waiting for him. As the fish meat, which came with its own salt, gradually became crispy on the outside and tender on the inside under the scorching flames, with both sides golden brown, Lorne came back to his senses, sighed, raised his hand to put the fish meat, which was cooked to the right temperature, on the plate, turned around, pulled open the partition, walked into the cabin, and put the tabla on the ground. It's time to eat. In the dim corner, a rustling sound came. A moment later, a purple-haired girl, about 1.3 meters tall, and with a black headband on her forehead, came over with her head down, dragging an ill-fitting loose linen robe. She was filled with a cold and gloomy atmosphere that blended with the darkness. Fish again. The purple-haired girl's demise fell on the fish on the plate, and she couldn't help but pause. This is the only thing on the sea, so just make do with it. Lorne spread his hands, also a little helpless. The purple-haired girl took the plate gloomily, looked at the food that made her feel a little nauseous, bit her lip, and raised her tense little face. I want to go home. Lorne rolled his eyes at the purple-haired girl opposite him, sat cross-legged on the floor, and answered unhappily. What a coincidence, me too. Suddenly, the purple-haired girl came to life, and a trace of visible excitement appeared on her gloomy little face. Then let's go. Go? Where to go? Your sister's map cannon blasted the boat to some goddamn place. Now we can't determine the direction and position. Should we use our heads to navigate? Lorne's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He pointed at the vast sea and accused, while his deep eyes fell on the purple-haired girl in front of him. Medusa, the youngest sister of the 3 Gorgon banshees, and the only mortal body. At the same time, she was also the fuse of the bloody massacre on the Invisible Island. The appearance of this legendary snake-haired banshee on this ship was purely accidental. If you want to trace the source and sort out the ins and outs, you have to mention the hermetic demigod Zeus. How to say it? This guy is worthy of the blood of Hermes, and has inherited his ability to steal. When the Seraphos fleet arrived at the Invisible Island, and searched for the traces of the 3 Gorgon banshees, he accidentally dug up the meat cocoon, wrapped in little Medusa from under the abandoned temple. Originally, this kind of thing should be reported, but the greed in his blood made this guy decisively choose to conceal it. Of course, in Zeus's cognition, he just thought that he had picked up the eggs laid by the Gorgons. At most, he would extract some of the Gorgon's divine blood from it and squander it after making a fortune. But he didn't expect that the 3 Gorgons happened to enter the stage of transformation of their demon bodies and transformation of their divinity. That is, an advanced change similar to the growth of snakes shedding their skins. So, Zeus, who was accustomed to stealing, secretly moved the giant cocoon containing Medusa to the small boat he had prepared privately and mixed it with a pile of stolen goods. What happened next was what Lorne was familiar with. First, he was chased to the Invisible Island by the Atlantis guards, and then ran into the Seraphos who were looting the temple at that time. Then, under some fanning the flames, the Atlantis guards and the Seraphos successfully started a fight under his deception. Then, the wanton blood and crazy gathering of magic awakened the other 2 Gorgons sleeping underground. Finally, the 2 Gorgons woke up, found their sister missing, and saw a large number of intruders, so they showed their full strength in a frenzy, and almost slaughtered all the outsiders on the island in anger. And Lorne, who was just watching the show on the sea, unfortunately suffered an unexpected disaster. The 2 Gorgons who noticed some clues focused their fire on him, and he almost became the hero, fragments on the ground like the unlucky guy Zeus. Thinking of this, a person who was affected by the disaster couldn't help but start to accuse. I told you, I was just passing by. I'm innocent. Why do you 2 sisters have to catch me and blast me? Those who can take the initiative to go to the island don't seem to be innocent, right? Little Medusa raised her head, and her clear purple eyes looked at the face that was complaining for herself. The scrutiny that seemed to be able to penetrate into the soul made Lorne unconsciously look away, muttering secretly in his heart. I didn't do anything bad. It's just that I exploded a wave of gold coins from my teacher Zeus, shot 100 or so sea monsters, killed the illegitimate son of Poseidon. Then, I provoked a whole team of Atlantis guards, held the descendants of Hermes hostage, blew up the ship of the Seriphus, and tricked them into fighting with the Atlanteans. In the end, the awakened Gorgon mistresses mistook the two teams that came to her doorstep as thieves, and cleaned them up. At this moment, after simply reviewing what he had done in his mind, Lorne, who had been righteous and confident, couldn't help feeling ashamed. Although I can't say that I'm innocent, my crimes are too numerous to list. Of course, if he knew that he had indirectly betrayed Bors and Aphrodite and triggered a new round of Olympus family crisis, he would have to add 2 more glorious achievements to his list of sins. Fortunately, Medusa, who asked the question, did not notice the change in Lorne's expression. She just asked in a muffled voice, while chewing the fish, "When will you send me back?" "Don't worry, I will definitely send you back, when I have the chance." Lorne made a solemn promise on the surface, but he did not give any substantive promise. Send her back? You must be kidding. Things have come to this point, and he has almost been confirmed to be suspected of kidnapping a young girl. Who knows if the Gorgon sisters from the Invisible Island will tear him to pieces as soon as they meet. These two with explosive combat power, even if Perseus, who will be fully equipped with godlike equipment in the future, meets them, he can only run away with his head in his arms, let alone himself now. Instead of gambling whether the Gorgon sisters will listen to his explanation, it is better to be safe and first have a good relationship with Medusa, the only one who can prove his innocence, or wait until he has enough self-protection ability before going to the Invisible Island for confrontation. Although this will invisibly increase some risk factors, it is the safest way at present. While Lorne was analyzing in his mind and reviewing his glorious deeds, he could not help but murmur. In short, the Gorgon sisters are the successors of the first sea god Pontus, Circe is the granddaughter of the second sea god Oceanus, and the Cyclops is the son of the third sea god Poseidon. Wow, now everything is complete. Almost all the new and old gods of the entire ocean system have been harmed by him directly or indirectly. For the sake of his life, it is better to stay in the sea for a while and find a way to get ashore as soon as possible. At this time, Lorne, who was a little weak, realized that a large number of enemies and creditors behind him were sharpening their knives, and he hoped that the city-state and land would appear as soon as possible so that he could successfully sneak across. Chapter 34 Brother, you smell so good. At night, the waves flowed on the Sea of Oceanus, and the breeze was blowing. A small cedar boat drifted gently, breaking up the reflection of the bright starry sky. Creaky, a subtle tremor came from the wooden board in the cabin, and a petite figure got on all fours and half crouched in the corner. In the night, the purple-red eyes with rectangular pupils flickered faintly, and the small head quietly approached the figure lying flat next to it. Suddenly, the pair of tightly closed eyes in the darkness opened, and stared at the face that was so close. "What do you want to do?" After a brief silence, little Medusa raised her head, and looked at Lorne, and answered in a muffled voice. "I'm hungry. If you're hungry, go out and find something to eat." Lorne pointed outside the door and spoke expressionlessly. But, little Medusa looked straight at Lorne in front of her, and her pink tongue couldn't help licking her lips. "You smell so good." In the speechless silence, the corners of Lorne's mouth twitched violently. I understand. He was spotted again. Of course, this was not lust, but just like his witch teacher, she had a great interest in Lorne's smell and body structure. To be more precise, Medusa showed a hunting instinct of snake gods and monsters, and they usually prefer to suck the blood of creatures to absorb magic power. The higher the purity of the target's blood, the stronger the divinity and magic power, and the stronger the fragrance it emits. As the offspring of Zeus and the legendary future god of wine, Lorne's temptation to Medusa is self-evident. She is simply a mobile blood-adding bag. Especially not long after completing the advancement, this snake-haired banshee has been hanging by some tasteless grilled fish, and her thirst for blood is naturally increasing day by day. Finally, on this night, she couldn't help but want to eat. But in terms of alertness and vigilance, Lorne is obviously better. Gurgle, the clear sound of the throat moving echoed in the small cabin, interrupting Lorne's thoughts. Lorne came back to his senses and saw Medusa sneaking up again. His face darkened. but soon, he stretched out his arm with a smile, his expression subtle. "Want to eat?" Medusa swallowed unconsciously, her eyes staring straight at the white arm. Her gradually fiery gaze seemed to be able to penetrate the target's skin, clearly seeing the rich blood vessels below, and the scarlet deliciousness flowing inside. At the same time, the little head couldn't help but press down. Pa. However, before Medusa could taste the deliciousness, another hand fell at lightning speed and hit her head hard. "You wish." Lorne's face suddenly changed, and he pulled back his arm as bait, scolding unhappily. "You don't sleep late at night and you want to attack me. Can you respect the senior? I'm better than you anyway. You rush over here without thinking. Aren't you just walking into a gun?" Medusa rubbed her aching head, and was silent for a long time, before she spoke her thoughts. "But I'm really hungry." Lorne, who had been trying to persuade her, was speechless. Well, she still didn't listen to the class. Facing the student who refused to listen, Lorne waved his hand angrily with a look of disgust. Go. There are still grilled fish left in the kitchen on the plate during the day." Medusa's mouth twitched, and she turned her head expressionlessly. "Where to go? The kitchen is next door." Lorne pointed to the opposite side and reminded unhappily. "I'm not hungry." Medusa's cheeks were tense, and she shook her head firmly to refuse this kindness. At the same time, she quickly jumped onto the bed, pulled the quilt over, and huddled herself in the quilt to establish a full-scale three-dimensional defense. Looking at the Gorgon who was defeated in front of a plate of overnight seafood, Lorne couldn't help shaking his head and sneering. "What? She's just a child." Outside the door, the moonlight was bright, and a moist sea breeze poured into the cabin, diluting the few sleepiness Lorne had at the moment. "Forget it, take a walk outside." Bored, he glanced at the silent quilt next to him, got up quietly, and went to the deck of the boat to look out. In the silent cabin again, a corner of the three-dimensional defense quilt was quietly lifted, and a pair of purple red eyes looked at the back of the person blowing in the wind, inexplicably absent-minded. This person seemed different from the humans she had met before. Very strange. But, well, also very reassuring. Medusa's curled body stretched slightly, fatigue kept rising in her heart, and her vision gradually blurred. At this time, seemingly bored with being idle, Lorne on the deck, picked up a homemade harpoon and stood in front of the ship looking down. "Tomorrow we'll eat fish again," Medusa muttered in a depressed tone, yawned deeply, and finally could no longer resist the invasion of sleepiness. She tilted her head and fell asleep. In the early morning, a meaty smell that was completely different from the fishy smell filled the cabin, waking up the sleeping Gorgon. Medusa's nose twitched, and her sluggish spirit suddenly became excited. Then she rubbed her sleepy eyes, sat up from the bed, walked out of the cabin barefoot, came to the deck, and curiously looked at the pot of meat breakfast that was stewing in front of Lorne. "What is that?" There was a fish tied nearby last night, which attracted a lot of seabirds. "I took advantage of the chaos to shoot a few," Lorne answered casually, while turning the wooden spoon and yawning. Medusa looked at the blood-stained harpoon next to her, and the bird feathers gathered in a small pile on the deck, and was slightly stunned. "It's almost cooked. Go wash your face first, and eat together later." The reminder in her ear made the snake-haired banshee come back to her senses and obediently complete the preparations before the meal. Soon, after stewing for most of the night, the completely soft bird meat was brought out of the kitchen and served on the table. Medusa looked at the oily thick soup in the bowl and the large pieces of bad meat, and couldn't help but touch her rumbling belly. "I'm still so hungry." For blood-sucking species, the magic, vitality and satiety brought by blood are difficult to replace with ordinary food. But, Medusa slightly raised her purple red eyes, looked at the figure who was chewing a piece of fish meat beside the ship's side, and pursed her lips. It should be delicious. The petite Gorgon banshee picked up the pottery bowl, closed her eyes, and took a big sip of the thick soup, imagining the sweet taste of blood in her mind. In a trance, it seemed as if she really drank blood from the soup base, and the warmth spread through her stomach and intestines in her lower abdomen, flowing to her limbs and bones. "It tastes good." Medusa couldn't help but widen her eyes, and took another big sip, reliving the previous enjoyment. The familiar feeling emerged again, along with a hint of fishy sweetness on the tip of her tongue. Fishy sweet? Medusa was stunned, and her eyes fell to the front. a hand holding a skewer, slender and white, like an exquisite jade. The only flaw was that there was a shallow scratch on the back of the hand. Medusa opened her mouth and was about to speak, but Lorne, who was leaning against the side of the boat, stood up suddenly, threw the fish in his hand into the surging waves under the boat in anger, and shouted excitedly, "Land! It's land! We can go ashore!" At the same time, a coastline that was within sight, as well as the continuous mountains and the iconic marble buildings of the human city-state, came into view. Today's word count was exceeded again. The initial provocation of the ocean gods was over, and the next step was to go ashore. Guess who'll be the first to get into trouble? Chapter 35, Minotaur Charge. On the northern coastal plain of the island, beside a lush forest path, two foreigners who had successfully smuggled ashore, one big and one small, looked at the tall city walls and towering city gates at the end of the road, hid under the shade of the trees, and began the standard collusion process. "What will you call me after you go in, Lorne?" Bang! A dull slap hit Medusa's little head, and Lorne repeated with a dark face, "Brother, call me brother. From now on, you are my sister, and we are the Seriphus merchants who go out to sea to make a living, understand?" "Oh." Medusa rubbed her aching little head, while casually uttering a monosyllable word with a perfunctory attitude. As for how much the Gorgon had heard, I'm afraid only she herself knew. Forget it. Even if brothers and sisters call each other by their names directly, there is nothing wrong in theory. Lorne raised his hand angrily, rubbed his swollen temples, and after a wave of self-comfort, he spoke again. "What about your own name?" "Anna." Medusa's answer this time was quite decisive, and her tone was not as dead as before. Obviously, she liked this new name very much, and this pronunciation originated from Greek. It means elegance, kindness, grace or grace, representing good blessings and expectations. Lorne nodded with satisfaction, and gently touched the little girl's head as a reward. In the world of the Age of Gods, the real name often reveals the origin and essence of the living beings, and possesses some mysterious power. In addition, curses, prophecies, spell locks and other behaviors all need this as a medium. Therefore, if such things related to life and property are easily exposed, it is likely to bring unnecessary danger and trouble. So for safety, Lorne specially put a vest on Medusa before entering the city to hide her identity. There is no way. Who made the three sisters of the Gorgon and blood of the Gorgon too famous for humans who will grow old, get sick and die? They are simply walking tang monk meat. As for Lorne himself, there is no need for this. On the one hand, his real name should be Dionysus, which no one knows so far. On the other hand, the word Lorne comes from the pronunciation of lion in Greek, and is the nickname given to him by his deceased mother. Except for his adoptive mother and teacher Zeus, the gambling goddess Hecate who is his partner, and the little Medusa in front of him, basically no one knows. Even his nominal father Zeus is not clear. He didn't wait for his lover to tell him the news, and he took action directly. Haha, it's also his own fault. Thinking of that thunderstorm night and the god king who thought he had the overall situation, Lorne sneered and shook his head. Little Medusa looked up at the face that was a little gloomy for some reason, bit her cherry lips, and spoke softly. Are you okay?" Lorne came back to his senses, chuckled and shook his head, then sorted out his thoughts, and continued to ask a few questions to complete their fictitious identity information. It seems that, because of the change just now, Medusa's next answer was surprisingly cooperative, and she quickly completed the basic collusion. After finishing the preparations, Lorne was still a little worried and reminded again. "Remember, after entering, follow me obediently, and don't run around. This is not like the invisible island. You should know how outsiders treat you." "Yes." Medusa's face became serious, and she nodded heavily, obviously understanding her situation. Lorne touched Medusa's little head and smiled warmly to show encouragement. Then he lowered his 5 fingers, took the little girl's cold hand, followed the flow of people on the road, and led the Gorgon to the gate at the end. Along the way, listening to the conversations of pedestrians, Lorne squinted his eyes, enjoying the breeze blowing in his face, and admiring this island called Crete. This is the source of ancient Greek culture. The terrain is mostly mountainous and deep valleys, the scenery is beautiful, and there are cliffs, rocky capes and beaches forming the coast. The standard Mediterranean climate makes the whole island sunny and rainy, with evergreen plants in the forest, flowers blooming everywhere, and olives, grapes, and citrus fruits planted in the fields. In addition, it is surrounded by the sea on all sides, and it is like being in a beautiful garden when viewed from a distance. It is said that there are nearly 100 ancient cities on Crete, the most important of which is Knossos, the capital of the king, known as the City of Cities, located in the coastal plain in the north of the island. Yes, it is the one in front of Lorne. Following the flow of people, after paying the city entry tax, the two successfully mixed into the city of Knossos. Through the towering city gate, a wide road paved with bluestone runs through the center of the city, connecting the main roads and alleys in the city. The buildings on both sides of the road are lined up, mostly made of stone as the main material, and are sturdy and durable. Looking around, there are residences, palaces, villas, hostels, public baths, workshops and other places, all of which are fully functional. The whole market is bustling. Stone carvings, gold and silver products, jewelry, pottery making, bronze smelting, seasonal fruits and vegetables, coarse food and snacks, etc. are all available. Beyond the surging flow of people, looking straight at the end of the road, a towering palace with a rectangular shape and an area of 22,000 square meters comes into view. The solemn axis, standard column structure, and patio-style lighting reveal a unique Greek style. There is the cultural and political center of the entire Crete island, the Palace of Knossos. And this towering residence belongs to a famous figure in Greek mythology. The Lord of Crete, one of the three future judges of the underworld, the son of Zeus and Europa. Following the relevant memories, Lorne's thoughts touched the last title that emerged in his mind, and the corners of his lips curled up with joy. And the famous victim of the Minotaur, the wise King Minos. According to legend, Minos' ascension to the throne was not legitimate. He seized the kingship of his brother Rhadamanthys and drove him away, before he successfully became the new king of Crete. In order to whitewash the sanctity of his inauguration, he prayed to Poseidon for a miracle to prove that his usurpation of power was legitimate. So Poseidon gave Minos a huge white bull and asked him to sacrifice it to him. But the bull was so beautiful that Minos finally slaughtered another bull for sacrifice. The angry Poseidon cursed Minos' wife Pasiphae, causing her to suffer from zoophilia. In order to cover up his ugliness, Minos asked Daedalus to make a wooden cow for Queen Pasiphae and hide her in it. But because it was too realistic, the white bull fell in love with the cow and mated with it, and Pasiphae became pregnant and then gave birth to a monster with a bull's head and a human body, the Minotaur, which means bull of Minos. Eventually, the scandal was exposed, and Minos ordered Daedalus and his son Icarus to build an underground labyrinth to imprison the Minotaur, a monster with a bull's head and a human body. After the incident, Daedalus and Icarus, father and son, also became prisoners, so there was the story of the two crossing the Sea of Oceanus and the wings of Icarus. Of course, according to Lorne's estimation, in the matter of imprisoning Daedalus and his son, King Minos, as the leader, more or less had some personal grudges, who made Daedalus make the cow so realistic, causing his own wife to be bullied by a cow. He did not dare to retaliate against Poseidon, the god of the sea, and he was in the wrong, and Daedalus's length, thickness, and thickness were just suitable for venting. So, in Greece, strength is still important. After Lorne secretly mourned for a victim on Crete for 3 seconds, he pulled up Medusa beside him and walked forward while casually narrating the next arrangements. Let's find a shop to sell our catch and other things, then go shopping nearby, buy some things and a sea chart, and then consider the next trip. There was silence beside him, and the tension on his hands became heavier. Lorne turned his head and saw Medusa staring at the dazzling local snacks such as milk, roasted bird eggs, and fruit wine on the nearby stalls. A trace of crystal saliva unconsciously hung on the corner of her pink lips and gradually stretched. Chapter 36. I can deceive 10 people like Medusa in one go. Seeing this, Lorne couldn't help laughing. He pulled up the little Medusa beside him and went to a nearby stall to ask, "Excuse me, how much is this?" 3 Athena coppers. How about this? A little more expensive, 5. Soon, Lorne had a bunch of local specialties in his hands. Come, try it. Seeing the delicious food in front of her, Medusa swallowed unconsciously, but seemed to be hesitant, in order to maintain her usual aloofness. Lorne slowly raised his arm with a smirk on his face. "Oh, you don't want to eat? Then I'll eat it all." "Who said I don't eat?" Seeing that the fragrant food was about to grow wings and fly away, the little Medusa, who could no longer resist the temptation, held Lorne's arm, took her own portion without hesitation, and chewed it. As the different flavors hit the taste buds and brought pleasant enjoyment, the last bit of embarrassment and reserve on the little girl disappeared, and she concentrated on dealing with the handful of snacks in her hand. Lorne shook his head and chuckled, stuffing a string of roasted bird eggs into his mouth to taste, while pulling the little Medusa beside him, walking in the bustling downtown, asking for the price of the goods in his hands. After several rounds of inquiries and investigations, he finally chose a shop with relatively fair prices and sold the goods. Total income: 14 Hera silvers, 107 Athena coppers. And he and Medusa consumed about a quarter of the income while walking and eating. It has to be said that as the royal city of Crete, the prices here are still not cheap. Of course, there are many valuable things on the hidden ship, such as temple slabs, sea god sacrificial utensils, mystical materials, etc. These are all carefully selected private collections by the thief, and taking them out will definitely make a fortune. However, on the one hand, those goods are too conspicuous, and it is easy to cause unnecessary trouble. Secondly, thanks to the gold coins that the 12 main gods drop every day, he is not really short of money. At most, he can just curse a few more blasphemous words when he runs out of money in the future. There is really no need to take this risk. Throwing today's harvest into his pocket, Lorne showed a kind smile on his face and talked to the elderly man in front of the counter. "Boss, what temples are there in the city, and how to get there? I want to offer sacrifices to the gods and pray for a smooth journey ahead." "Young man, are you a foreigner? I'm afraid it's a bit difficult to find a temple in Knossos." The old man held up the wrinkles carved by the years on his face and smiled helplessly. For some reason, the current King Minos doesn't seem to like the gods very much. He rarely participates in sacrifices and doesn't repair temples, so many places are abandoned. After listening to the old man's narration, Lorne nodded thoughtfully. He could probably guess the reason. It was most likely the Minotaur's fault. "My wife was teased by the gods and was raped by a beast and gave birth to a hybrid monster. This kind of humiliation is unlikely to be treated as nothing by any man, let alone Minos, the king of Crete. He didn't kill the Minotaur monster in the maze for sacrifice and violently flattened all the temples, which was already considered to be forbearing. How can I worship the gods like before? But this time, I'm a little embarrassed." Lorne raised his hand and stroked his chin, frowning slightly. The cooling period of Zhaochangban is about to expire, and he must take the initiative to give the 12 main gods a full life, so as not to be forced to die by the cheating dice on his body. Now, it's troublesome. But if you really want to worship the gods, there are places to go. With the old man's slow second half of the sentence, Lorne, who was thinking, couldn't help but come back to his senses, and his eyes lit up. "Where is it?" "There is a goddess palace on the hill in the northwest corner of Knossos." "Who?" "The Queen Athena." Lorne was slightly stunned when he heard the title, and then the historical materials that emerged in his mind made him react. Legend has it that the Minoan civilization was full of goddess worship, and the most revered and the most noble among them was the goddess of wisdom and war, Athena. They honored her as, which means lady, queen, and the corresponding records appeared on the subsequent Mycenaean stone tablets. Of course, Athena is absolutely worthy of this honor, because in the process of creating humans, Prometheus only gave humans a body, while Athena gave humans a soul. In a sense, she is indeed the female ruler of the human race. However, Lorne originally just wanted to turn over Hermes' cards and toss the ancestor of the Greek thieves. Taking Medusa to Athena's eyes was indeed an option that he did not consider. But at the moment, there seems to be no better choice than this. "Stranger, may the goddess protect your journey." The old man raised his hand to his chest and nodded to offer his blessing. After a simple thank you, Lorne took little Medusa out of the shop door and looked towards the pillared temple in the northwest. "It's just a worship. This person shouldn't be so stingy, right?" He muttered to himself for a while, looked down at Medusa who was still working hard on the snacks, and forced a kind smile on his face. "Will you go over there with me? I don't like them." Medusa shook her head, her eyes full of resistance. In the Greek world of the Age of Gods, gods and monsters are often the labor tools of the gods, as well as a lot of exclusive achievements and upgrade experience packages for demigod heroes. Although the three sisters escaped slavery, they still couldn't get rid of the pursuit from the outside world. Therefore, Medusa naturally didn't have a good impression of the gods who were behind all this. Lorne blinked and spoke slowly. "I heard that the market there is more prosperous than the east, and there are a lot more food." Medusa's eyes lit up when she heard this, and she was obviously tempted. "There are also drinks. In this weather, a glass of ice grape juice and pomegranate juice is simply too comfortable. I'll go." Suddenly, the tempted snake-haired demon no longer hesitated and quickly raised her little hand, her face full of eagerness to try. Even before Lorne left, the little Medusa next to him decisively pulled him up and walked towards the northwest corner, taking the initiative to fall into the trap. Lorne, who was dragged behind, couldn't help but shake his head secretly. TSK, this girl is too easy to fool, right? I can fool 10 in one breath." Then, Lorne raised the corner of his lips, and a trace of evil lark was outlined on his face. "How can this be possible? Take this opportunity to let her know the sinisterness of human hearts and what is real cruelty. Minoan civilization should be the earliest civilization in Greece. Athena seemed to be the most worshipped goddess on Crete, but later cultural changes and integration reduced her to the daughter of Zeus. So, I don't need to tell you who to mess with next, right?" Chapter 37, Stealing Athena's Tribute. In the ancient and magnificent stone temple, Lorne held Medusa's hand and followed the crowd of worshippers into the main hall. The morning light shone through the dome ceiling onto the marble throne in front of them. The luxurious statue, made of fragrant wood and gold, with ivory carvings as exposed skin, came into their eyes. The female ruler wore a bronze helmet, with long hair with distinct textures cascading down her back like a waterfall. A wooden sculpture of an owl rested on her shoulder. Her upper body was covered with snake-patterned armor. She held the spear of victory in her right hand, and wore a sheepskin shield, aegis, with golden tassels on her left hand. Her tall and slender figure exuded a fierce majesty and an inviolable sense of sacredness. The Minoans worshipped goddesses. Although some male gods were also mentioned, the description of goddesses in Minoan religion far exceeded the former, such as the mother goddess in charge of fertility, a female animal ruler, a female protector of cities, families, harvests, and the underworld, and so on. Some people think that these are different manifestations of the same goddess, who usually have corresponding animal images such as snakes and birds. And all these traces reflect Athena, who is known as the goddess of snakes and owls on Olympus. As the crowd bowed their heads and prayed, the blasphemers among them raised their heads slightly, looking past the humble believers who were willing to offer their wealth, and looked at the female ruler on the throne, looking at the appearance of the god with some contempt. There was silence all around, and the statue still stood tall, without responding to prayers, comforting pain, punishing contempt, or punishing filth. Lorne tightened the trembling little hand of Medusa in his palm, turned his head, and blinked at the Gorgon who was shrinking, and dared not raise her head. "See, I said it was okay." As if infected by the ease next to her, Medusa mustered up her courage, gradually raised her little head, and her purple-red pupils stole a glance at the face under the helmet. Because this sculpture is infused with faith and blessed by divinity, its face is blurred from a distance, as if covered by a layer of mist, making it impossible for mortals to glimpse the holy face of God. But a statue is a statue after all, standing high on the throne motionless, and its threat is not even as threatening as a wild dog that can bar its teeth on the roadside. Inexplicably, the fear that little Medusa had been weighing on her heart disappeared, and the gloom that had accumulated on her face for a long time was diluted a lot, revealing her former nature. "It's so boring here, when will it end? I'm hungry." The Gorgon rubbed her lower abdomen and pulled Lorne's hand, muttering softly, "Soon." Lorne rolled his eyes at the real hungry man beside him. After hearing the reminder sound in his mind that the task was over, he pulled Medusa to follow the donation process in an orderly manner, and walked out of the back door of the temple. At the moment of crossing the threshold, Lorne paused slightly, looked back at the groups of believers behind him who looked poor, whose clothes were washed white, but still offered everything to the gods, looking forward to a better life, and the extremely gorgeous and expensive sculpture in the hall, which could almost support dozens of families for several years. He shook his head gently and murmured silently, "Do you really like humans that much, Athena?" The sculpture would not respond. But in Lorne's memory, there is a future related to the Minoans. The eruption of the volcanic island of Hera, the tsunami of Oceanus, the continuous acid rain, the long-lasting dust cloud, all kinds of natural disasters representing the wrath of God, will sound the death knell of their civilization. The Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland will eventually invade and rule the entire island of Crete, burying the worship of the goddess and the future of the Minoans together. It seems that you are not necessarily worthy of this worship, my dear sister. Outside the door, Lorne sneered and shook his head, quietly put his outstretched hand back into his pocket, pulled up the hungry man beside him who was almost unable to hold back, and walked towards the busy market at the foot of the mountain. Under the shade of the trees by the road, Medusa was shocked. What? No money for lunch? Of course, worshipping the gods costs money, and I have dedicated all the lunch to the great female ruler. Lorne spread his hands, very helpless, with a hidden smirk hidden behind his innocent eyes. Hearing such bad news, Medusa's face, which was originally full of expectations, could not help but fall. Then, she gnashed her tiny silver teeth, and turned her head angrily. Where to go? I'll get it back. Seeing that the fledgling Medusa had overcorrected after overcoming her fear of the gods and became so fierce, Lorne's breathing stagnated, sweating profusely, and hurriedly grabbed the snake-haired banshee who wanted to go up the mountain to rob money. No need, no need. Take this first. Take some from the reserve fund for lunch. I'll go buy it right away. Then, he took out a few pieces of fragrant and exquisite snacks from his pocket and handed them to Medusa. Try it. It tastes very good. Medusa sniffed and took a small bite tentatively. Soon, the sweet and refreshing taste bloomed on her taste buds. A sense of satisfaction and pleasure surged into her heart. The young snake-haired demon couldn't help but sparkle with her eyes, praising the delicious food. Delicious. Of course. Lorne nodded without surprise, took a piece, and put it in his mouth to taste it, with the corners of his lips raised in joy, and spoke leisurely. This is a high-quality product for worshipping the gods. The taste must be amazing. Medusa, who was wolfing down, was startled. She lowered her head in astonishment and looked at the iconic snake pattern and olive leaf pattern on the snack in her hand. Her small body trembled suddenly. You stole the goddess's tribute? What do you mean by stealing? I paid for it. It was a fair trade, and we treated everyone fairly. Lorne corrected righteously and stuffed another piece of dessert into his mouth. Medusa subconsciously hugged the remaining dessert to her arms and then asked in confusion. But, isn't our money to be offered to the gods? That's right, we offered it to the gods, and she accepted it, so it means that she is willing to solve our difficulties and provide us with shelter. Lorne nodded, and the smile on his face became brighter. Then the question is, what was our trouble at that time? Hungry? Medusa thought for a while, and couldn't help but touch her belly and muttered. Lorne clapped his hands, and explained with a smile. So, you see, we offer what we have to the gods, show our piety, and find solutions to problems. The gods give back what they have, show mercy, and help us. Fair trade, no deception, isn't that right? Faced with this seemingly logical reasoning, Medusa was a little confused. It took her a long time to come to her senses and snorted coldly. Have you asked the goddess? Of course. Then what did she say? She agreed. Lorne looked solemn and spoke leisurely, muttering in his heart. Today, not only did he complete a weekly book, but he also brushed the daily book. The money was not wasted, and he tasted the craftsmanship of the court. It was a good profit. At this time, a smile of joy quietly appeared on that face, exposing someone's true nature. Although he was kidnapped by the dice on the surface, all the choices were made by him personally. Lorne, a soul from the future, obviously lacked true reverence for the so-called gods and destiny. As his nature was gradually exposed, he gradually began to enjoy the fun of fooling the gods. While he was blaming the dice, He took the initiative to make trouble and dragged Medusa into the pirate ship. After all, this future snake-haired demon would be killed by the demigod hero, and even her head would become a decoration of the shield in the hands of the goddess Athena. This time, he would take her to collect interest from Athena in advance. But obviously, unlike Lorne, who had turned into a fun person, the deep-rooted fear of the god still made Medusa feel a little uneasy, and she couldn't help but hummed and reminded him that goddess had better really think so. Don't worry, the great female ruler is a kind and generous god. How could she watch the devout believers starve? Lorne complimented the wooden sculpture in the temple against his will, with a righteous look on his face. Discussing the gods is not pious for believers. Since you have an insincere heart, what qualifications do you have to ask for the care of the gods? Just as the two were whispering, a faint whisper came from the stall on the side. A girl with long silver hair and a white silk embroidered skirt put down the items she picked up and turned to look at Lorne and Medusa under the shade of the tree. Her purple eyes were as deep as the night and as bright as the stars. Behind her, a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes and a wreath on her head pulled the skirt of the girl in the embroidered skirt, smiled and stuck her head out, looking at the opposite side with a gloating look. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 38, Riddler, Get Out of Greece. Lorne coughed slightly under the shade of the tree and winked at his accomplice next to him. Medusa immediately understood and quickly hid the stolen goods in her hand by hiding her body. A teachable child. Lorne nodded secretly, put his hand on Medusa's smart head and stroked it for a while, then turned his head and showed a subtle smile to the opposite side. Just now, I was just joking with my sister. Any joke has a certain serious component. The silver-haired girl in front of the stool spoke lightly, and her deep and penetrating eyes seemed to be able to see through the color of the soul under the flesh. Under the scrutiny of the pair of purple eyes, Lorne raised his arms angrily and posed in a posture of surrender with a sad face. It seems that you are going to investigate to the end. If I'm sent to the temple for punishment because of inappropriate words, I have nothing to say, but my sister is innocent. She is just a child who knows nothing. At this moment, as Lorne slightly turned sideways, the little Medusa who was pushed in front raised her head with a blank face. Humph, I just can't stand some people's sophistry of turning black into white and their self-righteous cleverness. The silver-haired girl snorted slightly, and the tense face gradually melted away. Lorne heard the obvious relaxation in her tone, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. This move of retreating to advance worked. Then, he pulled up the little Medusa who was responsible for sharing the firepower, ready to go down the slope smoothly. Thank you for your teachings. I will definitely regulate my words and deeds next time. Lorne promised with certainty while quietly retreating. Just now, at a distance of dozens of meters, he deliberately lowered his voice and whispered to the little Medusa, but the silver-haired girl still heard the content of the conversation. Obviously, this is probably not an ordinary character. In addition, her exquisitely embroidered dress with aristocratic patterns and the little maid behind her who also looks pampered. I'm afraid their status in Gnosis is not simple. There is no need to cause such a big trouble because of a little verbal dispute. Wait. However, before Lorne could get away smoothly, the silver-haired girl took the initiative to step forward. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It seems that you are not just speaking inappropriately. Stealing tribute is a serious crime. Lorne's body stiffened and turned his head awkwardly. In the end, he still couldn't avoid the important issue. As the atmosphere became a little subtle, little Medusa came out from behind Lorne, raised her head, and took the initiative to take the blame. I'm hungry. Lorne pressed the restless head back with a hand, and still maintained a warm smile on his face. So, what are you going to do? Throw us to the temple to be punished? That's not the case. The silver-haired girl's eyes swept across the little head that wanted to stick out behind Lorne, and she was a little soft. Then she looked at the other face and snorted meaningfully. After all, that goddess is a merciful and generous god. I'm not qualified to blame her believers on her behalf. Well, if there is nothing else, what's the hurry? The silver-haired girl once again stopped the guy who wanted to run away at some point, her very thin lips slightly raised, and a subtle smile appeared on her cold face. "Aren't you hungry?" Looking at the smile on that face, Lorne instinctively sensed the danger. Just as he was about to speak, the silver-haired girl spoke first. "How about this? It's the harvest festival recently, and the stall in front has prepared some puzzles. If you can solve at least 3 puzzles, I will treat you to this meal." Then just now, I didn't hear or see anything. The silver-haired girl spoke leisurely, and the conditions she threw out were quite generous. Unfair. The unexpected answer made the silver-haired girl's face freeze for a moment. Seeing this, Lorne shook his head and explained with a serious face. "I mean, this doesn't seem fair to you." "What do you mean?" "It was originally my improper words and deeds that offended the gods worshipped by the Minoans. It's rare for you to not care about it. How could I let you spend money alone? This condition is really unreasonable." Lorne answered seriously, then turned his head to look at the stalls in the distance, and suggested with a smile, "Why don't we compete together to see who can answer more puzzles correctly, and the loser will buy the meal in the end." "So, you want to compete with me?" The silver-haired girl raised her eyebrows, a little playful. Lorne smiled and didn't comment. "It's a rare festival. It's more interesting to participate together and enjoy the process together." "That makes sense." The silver-haired girl glanced at the lively and festive crowd on the street market, nodded slightly, nodded in agreement, and then waved to invite. "Then let's go, stranger." Lorne readily agreed, pulled Medusa beside him, followed behind with a smile, but secretly rejoiced that he had successfully fooled the game again. In the game, there are wins and losses, rewards, and punishments. This is an obvious truth. According to the silver-haired girl, if he wins, he can certainly have a full meal, and everyone will be happy. But what if he loses? Lorne's intuition told him that the price is very dangerous. Therefore, he decisively controlled the outcome of the game within the range he could afford. Winning is a meal, and losing is also just a meal. Using such a small price to exchange for that unknown and dangerous possibility is definitely worth it. "Here we are. When do we start?" The murmur in his ear interrupted Lorne's deep thoughts. He looked up in the direction pointed by the silver-haired girl, and 2 mahogany desks came into view. On one table was a large brown-black pottery jar, the mouth of which was only wide enough for one hand to enter and exit, and more than a dozen discarded pottery fragments with puzzles engraved on them were placed in the pottery jar, waiting to be selected. On another table were prizes such as fruit wine, snacks, clay figurines, etc. Seeing the dazzling array of snacks and toys, the eyes of the 2 little guys following behind them flickered at the same time. And Lorne, who had successfully downgraded the danger, had no worries, and immediately smiled and nodded, and took the initiative to throw a few Athena coppers into the basket on the table, and then made a pleased gesture. The silver-haired girl did not refuse, and stretched out her hand to take out a pottery fragment, and the first riddle came into everyone's eyes. "When you have me, you are willing to share me, but once you share me, I will no longer exist. What is my name?" "It's a secret." Before everyone could think about it carefully, a calm murmur came, and the silver-haired girl, who had only read it roughly, threw the pottery fragment on the table, and explained with a smile. "Because a secret is something that can only be known by one person. Once shared it is no longer a secret." "You're right." "That's right." The elderly stall owner laughed heartily, picked up the claybird statue on another table, and handed it over. Behind the silver-haired girl, the blonde and blue-eyed little girl who was staring at the thing eagerly immediately accepted the prize with satisfaction. The silver-haired girl put her fair and slender 5 fingers on the little follower's head and touched it. The silver-haired girl turned her head and smiled at Lorne on the side. "It's your turn." TSK, what an unreasonable desire to win. Lorne muttered to himself and took out the second question from the pottery jar. "I'm as strong as a stone, but a word can destroy me. What am I?" Then he smiled and answered calmly, "Silence." Silence is like golden stone, but a word can break it. Similarly, as the pottery fell, Medusa also got a small piece of butter cake that she had been thinking about and began to eat happily. Not bad. The silver-haired girl's eyes were full of interest, and she pointed at the pottery bottle and spoke in a deep voice. "Together?" Lorne smiled and nodded, and then he and the silver-haired girl took out the third and fourth riddles one after another. I can bring tears to your eyes and resurrect the dead. I will form in an instant and last a lifetime. What am I? I often take you away at night and bring you back during the day. No one suffers because of having me, but they suffer because of my lack. What am I? The two questions came into view, and almost at the same time, the two people's eyes flashed and spoke at the same time. Memory. Sleep. Their answers were accurate, but their respective riddles belonged to the riddles in the hands of the other party. Obviously, both of them had the intention of grabbing the other's questions first, leaving the other side with no way out. The unexpected collision made Lorne and the silver-haired girl stunned, looking at each other faintly, and a weird atmosphere spread. 5k daily updates completed. Thanks to the reader Sayali Reteacher for being the top of this book. Chapter 39. I admire you. Be my running dog. I want this. I want that. In front of the stall, the two little ones who couldn't wait any longer squeezed forward excitedly, eagerly asking to exchange for the prizes they had chosen, instantly breaking the strange silence between the two adults. Seeing that the two little guys were still clinging to the table after getting the things, staring at the other prizes eagerly, Lorne and the silver-haired girl smiled at each other and spoke in tacit understanding. So, continue. Then, the two people who reached a consensus stepped forward, and Lorne took out the fifth question from the jar at the signal of the silver-haired girl. It is both the lightest thing on the ground and the hardest thing, because it can trap powerful humans in one place. What is it? And the moment the riddle came into view, two voices rang out again at the same time. Doubts. Mystery. Doubts and mysteries can make powerful people fall into hesitation and distress, become psychological constraints, and stop moving forward. At this moment, the two answerers looked at each other in surprise. After a brief exchange of eyes, a strange feeling of mutual appreciation emerged in their eyes. The game will be more interesting when you meet a worthy opponent. My turn. Then, the silver-haired girl took the initiative to take out the sixth question without being humble. I don't exist in the past, but I will always exist in the future. All living things have placed their hopes on me. What am I? Looking at the riddle in front of her, the silver-haired girl was slightly stunned. For a moment, she had no clue, and frowned in thought. It's tomorrow. At this time, a groan behind her broke the deadlock. Lorne, with his arms folded, showed a calm but determined smile. Tomorrow? So that's it. The silver-haired girl thought for a while, and then her brows relaxed. This is a riddle from a human perspective. Only if tomorrow exists, these weak lives will wait and have hope, endure the suffering of the world, and keep moving forward, and overcome countless obstacles to create miracles. It's your turn. The silver-haired girl threw down the pottery shard, took a step back, and signaled to Lorne, but this time, her body was straightened, her eyes were fixed on the mouth of the jar, and she obviously felt the pressure. Lorne nodded, turned sideways and stretched his hand to the mouth of the jar, so that the participants behind him could read the puzzle together at the first time. Seeing this delicate little action, the silver-haired girl's eyes moved slightly, and her eyes showed a hint of appreciation. Soon, the seventh question was taken out, and presented to the two. What is it in ordinary people that is decreasing every day, but will never disappear completely? Breathing? Life? No. For a moment, Lorne was also caught in consideration, and could not break the situation. Hope. It's hope. At this moment, a low and pleasant whisper came from behind him. Suddenly, Lorne suddenly realized, and his confusion disappeared. That's right. For ordinary people, only hope will be reduced day by day in the process of being constantly eroded by life, but it will never disappear. Because once hope is gone, even if a person is alive, he is just a meaningless shell, and naturally he is no longer an ordinary person. It's a bit confusing for the authorities. Lorne turned his head and looked behind him. The silver-haired girl who was a bystander did not know why she was not happy at all for answering the first question. Instead, she stared at the Minoans who were coming and going in the street with happy smiles on their faces, pursed her lips, and a silent sigh leaked from her lips. She thought of some past events that made her unhappy. But soon, the silver-haired girl recovered from her memories and gave an apologetic smile to the figure waiting quietly in front of her. Sorry, I was distracted just now. Lorne smiled and nodded, showing his understanding, and made a pleased gesture. The last question. We can't monopolize all the riddles and prizes, right? We should leave some of this joy for others. That's right. The silver-haired girl pursed her lips and smiled, and stepped forward to take out the 8th question as the finale. In the pitiful eyes of the two little ones, Lorne selected the food and toys they liked for them. In fact, the outcome of this game was no longer important to him. Because what he wanted in the beginning was not a meal, after winning or losing, but to take the opportunity to make peace with the mysterious silver-haired girl opposite, dispel her dislike for him, and avoid an unnecessary conflict. Now it seems that his goal has been achieved. Therefore, it is time to end this entertainment program early. After brushing up the favorability of the two little ones, Lorne consciously stepped forward to observe the questions taken out by the silver-haired girl, and put on a posture of full strength to fight. However, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes passed. The two people in front of the stall looked at the puzzle in front of them, and fell into a strange silence, and no one spoke. Seeing this, the two little ones tiptoed curiously, and looked at the puzzle on the pottery. I can't be bribed, but I can be stolen at a glance. I'm worthless to one person, but priceless to two people. What am I? Is this question difficult? The two little guys blinked and looked at the two adults who had just won the battle in confusion. Ahem. Lorne and the silver-haired girl coughed slightly at the same time, and the embarrassment in their eyes flashed. The question was not difficult, and it was even too simple for the two of them. However, the answer. Finally, after a brief stalemate, the silver-haired girl succumbed to her strong desire to win, turned her head away, and coughed lightly. It's love. In fact, to be more precise, the question should describe the love between two people. At this moment, in this occasion and atmosphere, the answer is a bit subtle. Oh, it seems that I lost. In order to avoid further embarrassment, Lorne took the opportunity to speak, breaking the silence, and asking with a smile. So, what do you two want to eat? I'll treat you. That's not a rush. With the steps, the silver-haired girl was not in a hurry to come down. Instead, she looked at Lorne in front of her with interest and spoke leisurely. You don't look like someone who makes a living on the sea. No way. People always have to eat. It's all for living. Lorne smiled dryly and explained insincerely. Under the scrutiny of the pair of purple eyes, he felt a little guilty for some reason. At this moment, the silver-haired girl smiled even more intensely, and spoke as if she had prepared in advance. Although it's all for living, it's a waste to throw your talents into the boundless sea. How about this? Why don't I introduce you to work in the temple, so that you will not only have endless snacks, but also a considerable salary, food and accommodation, and money? Little Medusa thought of the wonderful taste of the snacks in the temple that remained between her lips and teeth, and her eyes lit up. However, before the head that was about to move could come out, it was pressed back by one. Thank you for your kindness. Lorne kept a polite smile on his face and declined. Although the food, clothing and remuneration of the temple can fill the emptiness of my body, it cannot solve my spiritual difficulties. Compared to being confined in this small grid, I prefer a wider world. Enter the temple. Are you kidding? The Minoans can't protect themselves. If he follows them, he might be easily taken care of by those potential gods one day. Since this ship is destined to sink, how can he jump into the fire pit without thinking? Chapter 40. Are you sweating profusely? You mean, the problem you are facing cannot even be answered by the gods? At this moment, the silver-haired girl narrowed her eyes slightly, and her eyes were more scrutinizing, not very satisfied with the so-called refusal. She rarely invites people, and rarely gets rejected. Of course. Lorne nodded and answered without hesitation. The silver-haired girl crossed her arms in front of her chest, pursed her lips and sneered. Oh. Why don't you tell me about your problem, so that I can know what it is, so that the gods can't do anything? Faced with such relentless pursuit, Lorne raised his hands helplessly and surrendered. It's not a big deal, but I'm full of curiosity about this world. I want to know why a sailboat coming from afar on the sea always sees the mast first, and then the hull. Why do apples fall to the ground instead of flying into the air? Why do things of different weights fall from the same height and always land together? A series of fantastic questions hit her mind, making the confidence and pride on the face of the silver-haired girl freeze. Why do we always see the mast first, and then the hull of a sailboat coming from afar on the sea? Why do apples fall to the ground instead of flying into the air? Why do objects of different weights always land together when they fall from the same height? Yes, why? These common things now add a why, which makes the silver-haired girl, who has never thought about it from this perspective, a little confused. Aren't the rules of the world supposed to be constants? Moreover, when objects of different weights fall from the same height, shouldn't the heavier ones land first? Why do they land at the same time? What's the reason? At this moment, the silver-haired girl not only failed to solve the first 3 problems, but fell into more thinking. As she thought more and more, her mind became more and more confused. Finally, after thinking hard for half an hour, the silver-haired girl raised her head dejectedly, feeling a little helpless and puzzled. Well, I really can't solve it for the time being, but what's the use of knowing these? For people, the world is also a mystery. Lorne looked up at the sky, looked down at the earth, and finally stared ahead. His eyes were far away and deep. If we can explore the essence and seek its truth, and then understand life and touch the concept, then we may be able to solve all the doubts, understand the soul, and reproduce immortality. Looking at the man who was talking in front of her, and listening to the grand concept, the beautiful face of the silver-haired girl was shocked at first, and then she came back to her senses. Her eyebrows gradually gathered, and she snorted leisurely. Immortality? How arrogant. Do you want to challenge the gods? No, I can't afford this. Lorne smiled and waved his hands, seemingly nonchalant, but also seemed to be pondering meaningfully. I just think that the creation brought by the gods is only the starting point of mankind, and should not be the end of mankind. As a creature, isn't it true that the better we are, the more we can prove the greatness of the gods? The better the performance of humans, the more the gods can prove their greatness? The silver-haired girl heard what she thought of, and suddenly laughed dumbly. Your argument is really impeccable. You are too kind. I'm just stating the facts. Lorne blinked, looking innocent. Forget it. Since you don't want to, I won't force you. The silver-haired girl rolled her eyes at someone on the opposite side, took the initiative to stretch out her right hand, and snorted. Tritagleia, my name. Instantly, Lorne's eyelids jumped. The silver-haired girl, who was extremely perceptive, raised her eyebrows and narrowed her purple eyes again. Do you know me? No, I just think this name is beautiful and unique. Under the girl's dim scrutiny, Lorne raised his hands helplessly and confessed awkwardly. Okay, I admit that this name is a bit long and difficult to remember. Oh, so, then you can call me Palace. The silver-haired girl nodded slightly, glanced at someone on the opposite side, and added calmly. Okay, Miss Palace. Lorne readily agreed and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, as if he felt relieved that the problem of remembering names had been solved. However, the little Medusa, who was being led, felt something slippery and sticky from the palm of that hand. At this time, after hearing the 2 names in succession, Lorne was actually sweating profusely. Tritagleia means the 3rd child born of Zeus besides Artemis and Apollo. This title may be relatively rare, making it difficult to guess the true identity of the silver-haired girl opposite, but the 3 words, Palace, appear much more frequently in Greek mythology, because it is the alias of the goddess of wisdom Athena. That's right, the one standing in front of Lorne now is the real owner of those tributes, the goddess of wisdom and war, Pallas Athena. That is, his half-sister with explosive combat power in the legend. Although, Lorne realized that the identity of the girl in front of him was not simple, and she might be a demigod or god walking in the world. But just after leaving the other side's temple, stealing the other side's tribute, and making up stories about the other side nearby, he ran into Athena, the real boss. This probability is probably more outrageous than a meteorite hitting his head. Fortunately, as Hecate said, the dice of chance that resides in him will provide him with hidden buffs in the process of prompting him to challenge destiny and oppose the gods, so that the gods cannot see through his nature. Otherwise, this goddess known for her wisdom might have discovered his identity as the son of Zeus at the first time. Ahem, it's getting late, why don't we eat first? Lorne calmed down and made a friendly suggestion to Athena on the opposite side, but he was secretly calculating in his heart. Hurry up and finish the guests. Take Medusa away immediately, and then stay as far away from this Minoan royal city as possible. After all, the goddess in front of him is too dangerous. The negligence just now may have made her discover some clues. If he continues to stay, she will dig out his secrets sooner or later. However, before Lorne could figure out where to find the most time-saving fast food, Athena on the other side chuckled and shook her head. Of course I have to treat you. Although I solved one more puzzle than you, I don't have the answers to your last 3 questions, so I lose. Athena explained casually, and then pointed to a house at the end of the road. It just so happens that I'm going to meet a friend. She should have prepared the meal. Let's go together. Lorne couldn't help but sweat more on his back when he heard this. If someone can be friends with Athena, he knows that he is most likely a god. Moreover, it is very likely that he is one of the 12 gods of Olympus. Although the dice can keep his identity secret, Lorne feels a lot of pressure facing 2 upright gods at the same time. Therefore, this dinner party should be postponed if possible. Ahem. It would be too rude to bother your friend just like this. How about forget it? Lorne smiled and wanted to refuse. Next time. I'll treat you guys next time. You don't want to? Athena smiled with narrowed eyes, then her face suddenly changed. Well, the bet is void. Guards, where are the guards? There are people here. Stop, stop, stop. I'll go. As long as you don't mind, can't I go? Lorne, who was being held hostage, was sweating all over. He quickly held down Athena's raised arm and humiliatedly agreed to the dinner. That's right. Seeing the slippery guy in front of her surrendering obediently in her hands, Athena showed a satisfied smile on her face, raised her hand forward, and made a gesture of invitation. Then, let's go, friend. At the moment, sticking your head out is a knife, and shrinking your head is also a knife. Lorne simply abandoned his distracting thoughts, pulled little Medusa, and strode towards the family in front. 2 updates have been released, and there will be another update in the evening. I'm asking for support and votes for my new book. I've dropped too many rankings recently. Chapter 41. Fruits on thin branches. Delicious but also irritating. Walking along the road paved with stones, it was flat and comfortable. Lorne looked around with the corner of his eyes and noticed that the stones on the road seemed to be cut into uniform blocks with a copper saw, and there was a complete drainage system along the road. The public places frequented by the upper class used clay as raw material to build more complete sewer facilities. As for the architecture, the houses were usually flat tile roofs and plaster, wood or large stone slabs, 2 or 3 stories high. They may have built low walls with stones and gravel and used mud bricks for the height. The horizontal beams on the ceiling were used to support the roof, and the patio was used for lighting. At a glance, the scattered houses were filled with the noise and fireworks of human society. From nothing to something, from barbarism to civilization, it was amazing to achieve such a level with just hands and wisdom. The various urban details that could be created with existing technology in front of him made Lorne, a soul from the future, a little amazed. We are here. Just as Lorne was marveling at the wisdom of the Minoans, Athena stopped and smiled, pointing to the 2-story building in front of him that was made of stone bricks and wood. The blonde girl next to him nodded in understanding, trotted forward, tiptoed, and excitedly pulled and knocked on the bronze door knocker on the door. Who is it, so early in the morning? With a lazy mutter, the closed door was creaked open from the inside. A petite and tender girl with the iconic black hair of the Greeks rubbed her sleepy blue eyes and stood barefoot on the carpet behind the threshold. Inside the house, the bright yellow fire was beating happily, exuding a warm atmosphere. Therefore, the girl only put on a white silk nightgown, which was too loose to cover her thin and slender figure. Fortunately, her unusually plump bust and the blue ribbon that passed under her chest and tied to her arm successfully lifted the clothes on her upper body and prevented them from sliding to the ground. But even so, even from a few meters away, Lorne could still see the bright white color and the slender waist that made people worry about its support. Thin branches bear fruit, delicious and irritating. In an instant, a certain apt description hit Lorne's mind. Ahem. The heavy cough outside the door was like a cold current passing through the hall. The black-haired girl with blue ribbon, who was still half sleepy, shivered and opened her eyes in a trance. She immediately saw two acquaintances and two unexpected visitors standing in front of the door. Wait, I'll change my clothes first. Immediately, the blue ribbon girl, who had come to her senses, saw the visiting guests and her not so elegant outfit, and her slightly red face was embarrassed. She hurriedly closed the door and turned to rush into the bedroom. After a rustling sound, the tightly closed door opened again. The girl in a plain white dress held her head high and chest out, maintaining a dignified posture, and went out to greet the guests. Yap, ahem. Athena coughed again, and a strange and obscure wave was transmitted forward as her purple eyes flickered. Obviously, the two were communicating in an encrypted manner through divine will. In an instant, the blue ribbon girl in front of the door hurriedly stopped talking, and after a series of winks and winks, she smiled and changed her words very stiffly. Palace? Why are you here? And you brought guests? They? Athena paused slightly, glanced at Lorne and little Medusa behind her, and smiled faintly. I'm a friend I just met. Friend? Hearing this, the blue ribbon girl looked up and down at the two new faces outside the door strangely, and her blue eyes were full of curiosity. She knew how proud and arrogant this eldest niece was in front of outsiders. To this day, the number of people who can be recognized by her and called friends by her can probably be counted on one hand. All of these people are the brightest stars in their respective fields, with extraordinary qualities. Could it be that these two are also? But their aura feels so ordinary, just like ordinary mortals. Ahem. Athena couldn't help coughing again, and reminded unhappily. We have guests, shouldn't you invite us in first, aunt? Oh, sorry. The blue ribbon girl slapped her forehead, smiled awkwardly, and quickly invited the four people who had been left outside the door for a long time into the house, and took the initiative to extend her hand and introduce herself. Hello, my name is. The blue ribbon girl rolled her eyes and said with a smile. Hera, just call me Hera. Hello, I'm Lorne, and this is my sister Anna. Sorry to bother you today. Lorne also extended his hand very tactfully, gently shook the warm fingertips of the blue ribbon girl, and introduced his and Medusa's identities. After a simple greeting, the three adults smiled at each other, and a subtle atmosphere permeated invisibly, quietly weaving into a sense of harmony that no one noticed. After all, they were surprisingly tacit in putting on vests for themselves. Come on, sit down first. I'll go prepare some fruits and snacks. As the host, the blue ribbon girl warmly greeted the visiting guests to sit down, and then walked quickly to the spacious back kitchen of the house. Lorne glanced at the slender back of the hospitable and slender figure, and then his eyes fell on the warm and bright fire in the house. A trace of understanding flashed across his eyes, and his lips and teeth murmured silently. The goddess of the stove, Hestia. She is the eldest daughter of the second generation king of gods Kronos and the queen of gods Rhea, that is, the eldest sister of Zeus, and the oldest among the 12 main gods of Olympus. At the same time, she is also the main god in Greek mythology who is in charge of the family affairs of all people, serving the fire of Olympus and the world. The flame symbolizes her existence, represents her divine authority, and is the guarantee of family sustainability, stability, harmony, and prosperity. This corresponds to the tradition of ancient times. The fire on the altar was lit by the ancestors, and their descendants are obliged to keep the candles lit, because the extinction of the candles means the extinction of the race. On the other hand, every family has its own stove, and every town has its own altar. The fire on the altar symbolizes the life of the town. Whenever the people of a town go to a new place to establish a colony, the sacred fire will accompany these brave immigrants to other places. Therefore, Hestia will also move to another place, to live with the migration of fire and civilization. In a sense, she is the main god closest to humans in Olympus. And today, seeing this goddess of the stove, she is indeed as unpretentious and warm as the legend says. It's just that. Lorne glanced at the chief goddess of Olympus who was having fun with the two little girls opposite, and his lips twitched slightly. Why does she seem a little unintelligent? HU. At this moment, Hestia, as if she had a premonition, sneezed heavily, then mumbled a few words, put down the fruit plate in her hand, and turned to look at her niece opposite. By the way, yap, ahem. Athena, who was sitting in the seat, rolled her eyes at the aunt, who almost let the cat out of the bag. Her face darkened, and she felt that her throat was about to smoke. Hestia, who had come back to her senses, smiled awkwardly and quickly changed the topic of her question. Palace. Yes, palace. The harvest festival hasn't arrived yet. Why did you come to my place in advance? What else can it be? There's a quarrel at home again, so I came to your place to avoid the limelight. Athena took a sip of honey water, moistened her throat, and hummed unhappily. Oh. What's the matter? Tell me. Suddenly, Hestia's eyes lit up, and she held the fruit plate with great interest, moved the small stool to the opposite side of her niece, and looked like a professional spectator. At the same time, Lorne couldn't help but prick up his ears, holding his breath, waiting for Athena's revelations. After all, this was a rare opportunity to understand the internal situation of Olympus, and it was definitely not just because of gossip. The third update is released. Please support, recommend and vote. Happy Lantern Festival. Love you. Chapter 42. Hephaestus, come, put on your hat. In the warm house, as Athena told the story of the Olympus Golden 8 o'clock show disguised as the mortal family tear drama of the year, Lorne, who was secretly identifying himself with the story, was sweating more and more. Speaking of which, this matter really has something to do with him. A few months ago, with the help of the dice of chance, Lorne stole part of Zeus's authority, causing the god of war to suddenly change from a great man to a weak man. As a result, he was kicked out by his unsatisfied bed partner, the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, which caused quite a stir. Soon, although Zeus regained his strength and hooked up with Aphrodite again, he once again won the favor of the goddess of beauty. However, the affair between the two gods was discovered by Hephaestus, who was secretly suspicious, which made the god of craftsmanship, who was the victim, very annoyed. Therefore, in a fit of rage, he tried his best and used all his skills to forge a golden net and caught the lovers who were having fun in bed, while Zeus and Aphrodite were having an affair again. Then, the unsatisfied Hephaestus summoned the gods of Mount Olympus, exposed the cheating couple to the public, and sought justice and judgment from the gods. But the final result ended with the honest man's defense breaking and concession. On the one hand, most of the gods who came to watch the excitement were male gods, and it was difficult for them to resist the charm of the goddess of beauty. Even Apollo, who had a high opinion of himself, was aroused by lust, and felt reluctant when he saw the shy Aphrodite. Hermes, the messenger of the gods who always liked to sell good things, simply declared loudly that he dared to use his head as a guarantee to be tied to the beautiful goddess of beauty. Even if he was accused by the goddesses on the scene for adding 3 more chains, he was willing to do so, and use this to plead with the honest Hephaestus. Finally, Poseidon, the god of the sea who had long coveted the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, also came out to stand in line. You know, because Hestia had been living in seclusion on Earth for a long time, there were only 11 main gods in Olympus at that time. Facing the affair between Zeus and Aphrodite, plus the support of Hermes and Poseidon, and Hera who was obviously partial to her youngest son, Hephaestus had to face 5 gods. Apollo, who was aroused by lust, chose to abstain. The goddess of agriculture Demeter did not care about worldly affairs, not to mention Zeus, whose bottom was not clean, so he could only pretend to be deaf and dumb. Even the 2 virgin goddesses Athena and Artemis stood up to support Hephaestus for a few words, because they despised the behavior of Aphrodite and Zeus. But facing the opposition with an absolute advantage, even if the theocracy meeting was held, the result was 3 votes to 5 votes. What's more, Hephaestus's respected adoptive mother, the goddess of the sea, Thetis, still settled in Poseidon's sphere of influence. The reason why he was able to ascend to the throne of God was thanks to the messenger Hermes who took him back to Mount Olympus. Under pressure from all sides, Hephaestus, as the victim, had to hold his nose and let the cheating couple go. Of course, this matter was so big, and not dealt with fairly, the storm would not be settled in a short time, and Hephaestus was a well-known stubborn person. Therefore, according to Athena, the god of craftsmen, as the victim, still makes trouble with the god of war as every now and then, and the whole Olympus is in a mess. For this reason, Athena simply turned a blind eye and went down to the world in advance to visit her aunt, the goddess of the hearth, Hestia, who lived in seclusion on the island of Crete. At this moment, after listening to the whole story, Lorne was surprised that he had directed a family ethics drama invisibly, and on the other hand, he lamented the chaotic ethical relationship on Olympus. In a sense, he seemed to have accidentally betrayed his nominal great-grandfather and great-grandmother. That's not right. Just as Lorne was trying to sort out the complex chain of information in his mind, Hestia, who was sitting on a small stool next to him, holding a pottery plate and cracking sunflower seeds, looked surprised. Ahem, the guy on the beach is so kind. Besides, the boy from the Maia family is also a person who will not do anything without profit, right? Since even Hestia could see this problem, Athena had nothing to hide, so she nodded unhappily and revealed more exciting news. Everything has a price. Since Poseidon and Hermes were willing to stand up to help Aphrodite, they naturally had some plan. And the only thing that outsiders could think of about that slut was her beautiful rotten meat. Of course, Aphrodite knew the answer well. So, when Hephaestus was busy fighting Ares, Aphrodite, who couldn't bear the loneliness, first secretly returned to the city of Paphos in Cyprus, bathed in the seawater there, and asked the three goddesses of beauty to apply ointment to purify her body and regain her chastity. Then she went to the Sea of Oceanus and had sex with Poseidon, who came to mediate. Later, in order to thank Hermes for his intercession, she went on to get together with the messenger of the gods. Athena said, with waves of nausea on her face. Hestia, who had eaten a big melon, was also stunned and pitied the honest nephew with a green head. When Lorne heard the great-grandmother's fierce record, he was secretly shocked. I'm going 1 against 3. Are you so capable? Moreover, the power of the goddess of beauty can be used in this way, and it also has a film repair. 666. But with this, it's no wonder that Athena ran away overnight and came to Hestia to hide. After all, she could do nothing while watching this mess happen. Even if she told Hephaestus, it would only rub salt into the wound of the honest man and make him suffer greater humiliation. The goddess of wisdom could only take care of herself and go out to avoid being bothered. After she finished speaking, Athena glanced at someone who was listening intently and snorted lightly. Come to think of it, you are quite in line with my relative's aesthetic taste. Do you want me to introduce you to each other? Well, no, I prefer to be faithful to one person. Lorne was startled, came back to his senses, and hurriedly laughed dryly, and shook his head to refuse. Are you kidding? What hasn't Aphrodite seen in this acre of land? When the bull demon king comes to plow the land, he will be squeezed dry and eaten up. I won't get involved with my small body. Moreover, the birth of this goddess was somewhat related to Uranus, the father of the sky. Perhaps there were some unknown secrets and taboos hidden in it. Even the walking human seed drill of the king of gods Zeus did not dare to touch it easily. There were rarely any gossips about Aphrodite, not to mention him as a demigod. Moreover, if I remember correctly, Aphrodite did have demigod lovers, but their fate was basically to die early without much pleasure. Thinking about it this way, this woman might really be a disaster sent in by Uranus. While Lorne was muttering in his heart about his great-grandmother who had a wide range of friends, he sat upright with a solemn expression, showing his determination not to go along with the crowd. Seeing Lorne's performance in front of him, Athena, the virgin goddess, nodded with satisfaction. Of course, she would not have thought that someone's so-called faithfulness was just one. But, it can also be a group of. Chapter 43 Curiosity Kills. Okay, let's not talk about this for now. It's getting late. I'll go prepare dinner. You guys chat first. Inside the house, Hestia, who had eaten so much watermelon, clapped her hands, got up from the bench, and walked to the kitchen. Dinner? Lorne was slightly stunned, looked up at the window, and found that the setting sun in the sky had already fallen below the horizon. Unknowingly, this golden 8 o'clock show in Olympus had actually lasted from noon to evening. Fortunately, with the snacks carefully prepared by Hestia, they didn't feel hungry, and all of them were immersed in this gossip discussion. This damn curiosity. Lorne slapped his forehead, a little annoyed. Don't worry, my aunt lives alone. There are plenty of rooms, and she likes to entertain guests. You can stay here tonight. Athena glanced at Lorne's strangeness, put down the cup of honey water, paused slightly, looked at the bustling street outside the window, and smiled and suggested, Besides, the harvest festival is coming soon. It's a rare opportunity. There is everything here, including food, drinks, and entertainment. Why not stay a few more days and enjoy the festival before leaving? Lorne's eyelids jumped, and he subconsciously wanted to refuse, but he felt a tight pull on the corner of his clothes behind him. He turned his head and saw the bright eyes of little Medusa, which were full of desire, and her throat that kept swallowing saliva. Thinking of the desolate and dilapidated temples on the invisible island and the human outsiders who flocked to the island to fight, Lorne's heart moved, and he was thinking. For a long time, under the instigation of the gods, humans have been constantly conquering the titans scattered in the world, creating so-called great deeds to pay tribute to the gods. The three Gorgon sisters who fled all the way from the Erema crypt to the invisible island are one of the most obvious victims. But in fact, humans and gods are not mortal enemies, and the gods' motives are not simple. They are probably trying to stir up conflicts between humans and gods and monsters, making it difficult for the two groups with great potential to form a union, and thus posing a threat to them. Perhaps, this opportunity can be taken to let Medusa, who has not yet fallen into madness and the persecution, gradually come into contact with human society, and change her perception of the human group. After all, humans are not the only heroes who are eager to make achievements, warriors who hope to become famous by killing gods and monsters, and monarchs who are greedy for immortality. Ordinary people who give everything for a meal and strive to pursue simple happiness, who do not want to harm others or be harmed, are the majority of human society. If he wants to shake the power of Olympus, he must use all the power he can. Lorne's eyes flickered, and his thoughts turned several times, and finally he made a decision in his mind. He first looked up and smiled at the little Medusa who was looking at him eagerly behind him, and then nodded gently to Athena. It's better to obey than to be respectful. Sorry to bother you. It's just a small convenience. Besides, it's the tradition of the Minoans to treat guests from afar as well as possible during the festival. Don't be so polite. Athena smiled and nodded, and then called the little blonde girl who was walking in the corridor. Nikki, take them to 2 empty rooms upstairs, and put down their luggage first. Okay. The blonde girl with a wreath on her head trotted all the way and happily accepted the order. Then she pulled the little Medusa who was inexplicably in tune with her, and went upstairs excitedly. Lorne followed behind with a few pieces of luggage. His eyes fell thoughtfully on the little girl named Nikki. If I guessed correctly, she should be Athena's most important subordinate god, the goddess of victory, Nike, and the name Nikki is her feminine translation. According to mythological records, the classic image of the goddess of victory is wearing a wreath on her head, with a pair of golden wings on her back, a fit body, and fluttering clothes, as if she is wandering down from the sky. Her plump body reveals strength and health under her thin clothes, showing victory and the joy that comes with it. Because she is the personification of victory, victory will surely follow wherever she goes. However, now, the 12 main gods of Mount Olympus have only experienced the Titan War with the 12 Titans of Mount Otteris, and their power has just been consolidated. Athena herself was born after the Titan War. Although she has the dual divine power of wisdom and war, she has not experienced many wars and victories. Therefore, it is not difficult to understand that Nike, the goddess of victory of the subordinate gods, is still a child. As to adjacent guest rooms were selected under the leadership of Nike, Lorne put down his luggage and smiled. You go play nearby first, I will tidy up the room. The two little girls who were released were immediately excited, and turned their heads to rush downstairs. Wait, take these with you. A voice from behind called out to little Medusa. As she turned around, Lorne took out a bronze badge from his pocket, and tied it around little Medusa's neck with a rope. He also stuffed dozens of Athena's coppers into the pockets of the two little girls as pocket money. He watched the two of them go downstairs hand in hand, passing by Athena without attracting the attention of the goddess of wisdom. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Like the dice of chance, the badges Lorne got from it were also tainted with the unpredictable chance of the world's destiny, which could effectively conceal Medusa's identity as a god and monster, and prevent her from being easily sensed. Of course, you get what you pay for. According to the instructions of the Dice of Chance, the bronze badge is only for use on the same day. The effect of the silver badge can last for about a week, and the gold badge can be renewed for at least 1 year. So, this is why Lorne wants to continue working. If he didn't want to be sensed by Zeus and the destiny of this world, he needed to keep making trouble, using his own contingency changes to interfere with the calculation of destiny, necessity, so that he could hide safely. Because, perhaps from the moment he was born unexpectedly early, he had already become a variable that this world could not tolerate. Looking at the two little guys who were holding hands and buying snacks on the street, Lorne gently closed the window, made the bed, and then pushed the door open and went out. Bang! Just as he went out, a dull sound of landing came from the corridor. Lorne looked up and back, and immediately saw Athena standing in front of the railing on the second floor, with her hands in a clenched state. At this moment, she was looking down at the two apples and oranges of different sizes and weights that fell to the ground almost at the same time on the floor. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and she muttered to herself. For objects of different weights and sizes, if the interference of some factors such as shape and material is reduced, the speed of falling to the ground is actually almost the same. If two objects of the same material and shape, with only differences in weight and size, fall from a height, perhaps the error will be further reduced. Hearing Athena's conclusion, Lorne was surprised. Just by hearing her mention, she was able to draw inferences from one example to another, and think of reducing interference factors, and conducting more complete and objective experiments. This not only allowed her to directly jump out of the old common sense thinking such as why do feathers and apples, shot put and paper fall one after the other, but also allowed her to almost deduce the complete law of free fall. You know, from the time Aristotle raised the question to the end of Galileo's correction of the fallacy, humans spent nearly 2000 years in this process. How should I put it? She is worthy of being the goddess of wisdom. You came out just in time. How did you know? Come over and explain. At this time, Athena, who was standing in the corridor on the second floor, heard the movement, turned her head to look at Lorne who was leaving, and casually extended an invitation. In an instant, Lorne's face froze. He is a theorist who can fool people, not a practitioner who can fully deduce the process. This damn curiosity is really killing me. Seeing that Athena was aroused by his curiosity, Lorne, who was sweating profusely, turned his brain frantically, thinking of a way to get out. Chapter 44. Fight. Fight. I want to see a river of blood. Dinner is ready. Finally, the call from the kitchen, which sounded like the sound of nature, made him rush downstairs, as if a drowning man had grabbed a life-saving straw. I'll help. Seeing someone fleeing in panic, Athena could only shake her head and give up for the time being. She had no choice but to go downstairs and help in the kitchen. Although her aunt was usually quiet and gentle, once she entered her exclusive domain and picked up the spatula and soup spoon, her fighting power and sense of oppression would increase exponentially. Under the command of the stove goddess, the two adults quickly cleared the table and brought up the sumptuous dinner. As the aroma of food drifted out of the house through the half-open window, the two little girls wandering on the street were automatically summoned home. They sat down obediently next to their guardians and looked at the rich dishes on the table. Up to now, the Minoans have learned to raise cattle, sheep, pigs, goats and other livestock, grow wheat, barley, wild peas, chickpeas, and cultivate a series of crops such as grapes, figs, pomegranates, and olives. In addition, the abundant seafood nearby made their diet quite extensive. Even, Lorne saw artificially produced honey on it. Obviously, these Minoans on Crete have learned some tricks of domesticating bees. Come on, don't be polite, try my cooking. As she said that, Hastya stood up, picked up the spoon and fork, and took the lead in putting some of her most proud dishes on the plates of Lorne and little Medusa. Lorne was flattered to be personally entertained by the goddess of the hearth. Don't worry, Auntie likes new faces to taste her self-developed recipes. I've never seen her so enthusiastic when I visited her before. Athena, who was ignored, snorted and glanced at Lorne and little Medusa next to her, smiling and joking. But after the meal, I'm afraid you will pester her for some suggestions for improvement, and you may even talk all night, so I suggest you run away after eating. You girl, you only know how to plot against me behind my back. Be careful that you will only be served a bowl of porridge next time you visit. Hestia picked up the spoon and glared at her niece unhappily, and everyone couldn't help but smile knowingly. As the atmosphere at the table eased, the goddess of wisdom decisively forked a piece of golden lamb chops, ate it elegantly and quickly, and took the initiative to fire the first shot of the meal. Everyone immediately stopped being reserved and followed her example to choose food according to their own preferences and began to feast. The two little ones have a special liking for desserts and fruits, while Lorne, who is still growing, prefers meat. Although he had some doubts about the food level and cooking skills in the age of gods, as he took a piece of lamb chop into his mouth, the soft and elastic meat melted as soon as it touched his teeth, and the rich juice burst on the tip of his tongue. Just a pinch of salt and a little bit of spices, the original taste of the food not only did not have the slightest fishy smell, but was even more delicate and rich. High-end ingredients often only require simple cooking. Similarly, good lamb does not need to be cooked with heavy spices. Some people who couldn't stop eating quickly showed off 7 or 8 pieces. The pleasure and satisfaction brought by meat made his always tense heartstrings relax a little. But it was a pity that there was a lack of black pepper to relieve the greasiness. Otherwise, this meal would be perfect. Letting down their guard and opening their stomachs. After a burst of eating, the few people who were full of food sat lazily on the chairs with a satisfied look on their faces. The greatest respect for a chef is to eat all the dishes she made. Looking at the empty cups and plates, Hestia nodded with satisfaction and took the initiative to get up and clean up the messy table with the temperament of a good wife and mother who stays at home. Of course, the premise is to ignore her current height and immature appearance. Perhaps because of her young mentality and the divinity of the virgin goddess, the eldest sister of Zeus is still like a young girl. But it is undeniable that the nutrients absorbed by Hestia over the years have not been lost in vain, and she is even a little supermodel in the big places. Looking at the two big, white, swaying fruits while Hestia was walking, Lorne couldn't help but feel a little angry and dry in the mouth. Well, since the benefits obtained from the power of war have not been fully digested, coupled with the strong hormones of adolescence, he is inevitably more likely to be in heat when he encounters some adult women who are more likely to commit crimes. And Hestia is exactly the candidate who is quite suitable to be a wife in Greek mythology, whether it is personality or body shape. As for Athena, Lorne recalled his first encounter with her and the difference between the statue and the real person. He could only say that she was a scapegoat. Ahem. A familiar cough beside his ear made him start subconsciously. He immediately came to his senses, sat upright, and stared at the wood grain of the dining table. A fine sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He actually forgot that he was in front of the two main gods. It seems that he was too full. Fortunately, Athena just brought up a topic and did not notice someone's improper eyes and blasphemous thoughts in his mind. "We just had dinner, why don't we do something to kill time?" the goddess of wisdom said. Her eyes fell on the fruits of different sizes and weights on the dinner plate, and her thoughts were self-evident. It's not suitable for strenuous exercise after a meal. Let's play some puzzle games. Lorne saw this and quickly interrupted the topic. He didn't want to work hard to measure data and do scientific research with this goddess of wisdom who had 800 minds. With my own limited knowledge, I can fool people for a while, but if I really want to dig deep into a field, I will be exposed sooner or later. But it is better to stop this woman's thoughts in advance, so that he won't have to be on guard every day. "Wait for me," Lorne said as he got up and went upstairs. He took out the Greek version of chess that he had used to trick Hecate from his luggage and placed it in front of Athena. A puzzle game. Athena looked at the crisscrossing grids, played with the chess pieces of various shapes in her hands, listened to Lorne's explanation of the rules with interest, and her attention was quickly attracted to this thing. Very good, she took the bait. Lorne nodded with satisfaction, and then set up his formation to teach Athena to familiarize herself with the rules and techniques through practical operations. Of course, he used the chess moves and patterns of another old acquaintance, Hecate. Isn't it getting harder and harder for me to deal with the goddess of the underworld on the chessboard? It just happened that the dignified goddess of wisdom came to compete with her in the air, and I acted as a middleman to give advice and review the game. Having dealt with two big troubles at once, Lorne couldn't help but show a sinister smile on his face. Fight, fight, I want to see a river of blood. Time passed like quicksand between fingers, passing unknowingly. The clear sound of chess pieces falling on the chessboard overwhelmed the crackling of the burning fire, and Athena gradually became intoxicated in this fierce virtual fight. Lorne also got a lot of ways to play against Hecate by reproducing the previous chess game, which can be said to benefit both sides and gain a lot. But he looked up at the round jade hook that had jumped into the sky outside the window and yawned. It's too late. How about we make an appointment later when we are free? Okay. Athena nodded with a lingering feeling and did not force her to stay. After all, she had just come into contact with this interesting game, and she also needed to sort out her thoughts and come up with a targeted way to play. Looking at the back of the person who was pulling her sister upstairs, Athena picked up the chess piece representing the queen in her hand and played with it between her fingers, and her purple pupils, that were as bright as star marks, flickered slightly. What an interesting little guy. Maybe I can. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 45. Mystery cannot change evil, and Krypton cannot change fate. As the night deepened and the fire in the living room went out, Lorne quietly turned over and locked the doors and windows. Then, he took out the 12-sided dice stealthily, put the silver badge he had just obtained this morning on the altar, and then shook his clasped hands while silently reciting the expected target in his heart. Athena, Athena. Give me an Athena. Friends who have learned summoning know that summoning requires a catalyst, and the items are not fixed. They can be scenes, sacrifices, or something that establishes a connection with the summoning target, commonly known as a holy relic. As far as Lorne knows, some of his fellow madmen in the gaming circle were fanatically trying to bring some local specialties, the red soil in front of King Arthur's tomb, when they traveled to the UK, clamoring to use it as a holy relic to summon a big eating, beautiful woman in a suit with a silly hair on her head to win the Holy Grail war for them, so that they would no longer have to work overtime. 996. After several rounds, seeing how they would take out several kilograms of stuff from their suitcases and post pictures of it in the group, Lorne wondered if they had plucked all the graves of King Arthur bald. Of course, even if all these preparations were complete, they would still have to do what they should do, whether drawing cards online or practicing offline. After all, you can't change the truth, and you can't change your fate. Some summons rely on luck, and some summons rely on tricks. You have to accept your fate in this business. Therefore, Lorne, who was almost numb from tricks, didn't have much hope. He could only see if the so-called dice of chance would obey the Eurasian law of conservation and give him some venue bonuses, because he had bet Athena next door as a holy relic. As luck struck, Lorne decisively let go, and the 12-sided dice that fell on the table rolled a few times, and a scarlet number composed of blood-colored spears appeared on the front. Yes, well, it's crooked again. Seeing the completely different emblem, Lorne raised his hand in dismay. The moment he wanted to take back the dice, a silver-white bloody character flickered and floated on the altar in his mind, exuding a violent and fierce divinity. Lorne's originally disdainful eyes froze instantly, and his pupils shrank sharply. Surprisingly, it's this. At the same time, in Olympus, the temple of beauty, the soft bed that was shaking violently suddenly stopped swinging. Yes, the god of war, who was waving his sword and fighting vigorously in the tent, shuddered and his face flushed instantly. Accident. This is an accident. It must be that Hephaestus has been pestering me recently. Bang. Before Ares could finish his explanation, Aphrodite's charming face was already covered with frost and disdain, and she kicked the useless man under the bed. Originally, she had just come back from outside and heard about the dilemma of her lover, and she wanted to comfort him personally. The result is another silver-plated spearhead, which looks good but is useless. If I had known earlier, I should have stayed in Atlantis for a few more days. Yes, who got up from the ground, wanted to prove that he was still powerful, but as the familiar feeling of fatigue came over him, his face suddenly turned black, and he wanted to cry, but had no tears. Why is it here again? At this moment, in a certain house in the city of Knossos, Lorne felt the scholared handwriting of the divine power in his mind, and was even so excited that he wanted to jump out of bed. War, divine power, infinite martial arts. I'm the god of battle. I'm the god of terror. I will set off killings again and again, go through countless battlefields, sacrifice with blood, temper with fire, and reach the top. As the arrogant words of God echoed in his mind, Lorne held the corner of the quill tightly with both hands, enduring the overbearing impact of the war divinity on the altar in his mind. At the same time, the corresponding information was reflected in his heart. The so-called infinite martial arts refers to an era in which martial arts have reached a point where they are almost unparalleled. Such people can easily achieve complete unity of mind, body, and skills, and can exert the highest combat effectiveness even under any spiritual and sexual conditions. As far as Lorne knows, there are only a handful of people who deserve this title in the entire Greek heroic age. The most famous of them is the future Hercules. And 1,000 years later, Lancelot, the Knight of the Lake in Celtic mythology, also had such an honor. According to the original records, Lancelot had no defeat in his life, and the Knights of the Round Table in the same rank basically have records of failure. Legend has it that when King Arthur was assassinated, Lancelot was able to rush back from France, form an army by himself, and protect King Arthur alone. He blocked the attack of an army with his own strength, and left easily after the incident. Even after losing his weapon, he could easily poke the enemy's head with a branch. Obviously, these two representatives of the peak of martial arts are enough to prove the value of this title. However, if martial arts do not reach a certain level, how can one achieve the unity of mind, body and skills? Lorne looked at his two white hands, and could not help but feel a little skeptical. However, with the washing of the war divinity, he soon realized the true meaning of the unity of mind, body and skills in infinite martial arts. Mind refers to the unshakable heart and spirit, and is more inclined to refer to perseverance and fighting will. Skill. This is easy to understand, referring to all kinds of martial arts skills, which can be acquired through continuous fighting and training. Body. Naturally, it is the final physical quality, which can keep up with the level of skills. In short, this means that, even if there are various interferences and influences in the mental and physical aspects, one can still perfectly exert all his own combat power. To achieve this, one needs a tenacious will plus proficient martial arts skills plus corresponding physical ability, which is a comprehensive evaluation. But thinking about it carefully, Lorne could not help but feel a little confused. Although he has been promoted to a demigod, he has rich combat experience in fighting titans and monsters, as well as a strong fighting will. However, this is still a long way from the real, infinite martial arts. To reach this level, is it enough to just instill a war divinity? You know, even as the god of battle has not fully reached the level of infinite martial arts. Otherwise, he would not be used as an experience pack by the other main gods at will. But, while Lorne was thinking, the silver oracle in his mind turned into endless bloodlight and exploded, and a series of bloody and murderous battle scenes were madly stuffed into his mind. Blood, war, killing, death. The fierce figure wearing a bronze feathered helmet and leather sleeves on his arms, sometimes waving a war bronze spear, sometimes holding the sword of the god of war, constantly piercing, sweeping, picking, and chopping at the enemies rushing in from all directions. The figure exuding violent murderous intent became a giant beast on the battlefield that tore everything and devoured everything. He was born with majesty, agility, and tireless fighting. He is the enemy of wisdom and the disaster of life. Blood was flowing freely, and lives were being cruelly harvested, dedicated to terror and death. Headless titans, heartless nymphs, winged dragons, roaring heroes. Figures came one after another, fell under his sword, fell in front of his spear. As the last standing figure fell down, facing the god of war, Lorne, he felt a pure and extreme fighting spirit and madness crashing into his heart, and the scarlet blood gradually spread and swept. Suddenly, his eyes turned red, and his heart beat like a heavy drum. The hot blood pumped out of it madly flowed to his limbs and bones, like flames burning in his body. An impulse to find an opponent and fight hard made him unable to control himself, and he jumped into the dark courtyard. Lorne gritted his teeth and relied on his sanity to break off a branch and chop the flowers and plants on the road. In an instant, branches and leaves flew everywhere, flowers withered, and the entire nursery was in a mess. Finally, after a catharsis, the uncontrolled blood in the body finally showed signs of easing. However, before Lorne could figure out how to restrain this unruly fighting spirit, a cold whisper came from behind him. Rough to rough. Under the moonlight, Athena, dressed in a plain white dress, looked at the mess on the ground with a disgusted expression that even a dog would shake its head at. She picked up a branch from the side, tapped her palm, stepped over the broken flowers and leaves along the way, and walked slowly towards Lorne, who was holding a branch in the yard to show sword moves. Okay, let me teach you how to use a sword. In an instant, the unruly fighting spirit in Lorne's body burned like fuel on a raging fire, and the sword in his hand could not help but slash at the goddess of wisdom. A fierce battle is about to break out. I only need 11 monthly tickets to get a badge. I would like to ask the big guys who have some votes to give me some to satisfy the author's collecting habit. Chapter 46 please, whip me hard. The scarlet blood stirred up the violent ether tide, which was surging like a whirlwind. The dazzling sword light was forced out from the tip of the branch in Lorne's hand, heading straight for Athena's throat, and suddenly arrived. Too slow. In a flash, the goddess of war, who was standing still, raised her hand and shook her wrist, and the sword was sealed an inch in front of her, and she pushed away the fierce branch with a light touch. Suddenly, the overwhelming force from the opposite side not only deflected the branch in Lorne's hand, but even he himself couldn't help but stagger and hit the flower pot beside him. I remember you should have eaten tonight. The casual question in his ear, with a hint of teasing, made Lorne's blood pressure, which was originally a little high, explode uncontrollably, and his eyes were full of bloodshot. You want to be quick, right? Okay, then be quick. The fighting spirit was surging and boiling, and Lorne stomped his left foot on the ground, and several marble floors around him turned into powder. With the force of a recoil, he stabilized his deflected body and shot forward at lightning speed, the sword in his hand as fast as a meteor shower. That's it? Athena yawned, raised her hand slightly, and casually swept the starlight in the sky. Her thin and slender body was like a reef standing on the coast. No matter how the stormy waves washed it, it remained motionless. The bored expression on the goddess's face was full of sarcasm. Fight. 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 It was difficult to advance an inch. On the bloody battlefield in Lorne's mind, it seemed that countless souls were roaring, and the golden blood from the god of war was burning fiercely, turning into infinite power in his body. Buzz. With a sharp explosion in the air, the blood-colored torrent condensed into a point and shot forward. The whole world seemed to be pierced by this scarlet light. The speed is enough, but the accuracy is not good enough. Athena, whose skirt fluttered in the strong wind, gave a calm evaluation, then raised the corner of her lips, and turned her voice cold. But you should know that your enemy will move. Before she finished speaking, the goddess of war slightly turned sideways, and took a half step forward. The unstoppable blood-red sword light narrowly brushed past the fluttering silver hair and landed in the air. A slight mistake can lead to a great error. What's worse is that as the sword missed, Lorne's body also tilted forward, and he could not control himself. Snap. A loud critical hit his buttocks. The damage was not great, but it was extremely insulting. Lorne felt the burning pain from his buttocks, and couldn't help but grin, and his boiling blood became more turbulent. Not enough. Not enough. Although the speed and strength can barely keep up, the skills are not enough. Skills? I need skills. The silent shout in his head immediately made the bloody river of his heart surge. Then, headless titans, heartless nymphs, wingless dragons, roaring heroes, one after another ferocious figures, born in blood, stepped onto the battlefield, and launched a desperate charge again and again. The god of war, wearing a bronze-feathered helmet and leather sleeves on his arms, brandished a sword and a spear, facing the tide of challengers, slashing, stabbing, and hacking again and again. Heavy punches, sword sweeping, claws biting, spears and spears shooting. facing different crises again and again, one by one. The deadly moves that hurt people and risked their lives savagely poured into Lorne's soul and appeared in front of him. With the sharp pain of needles in his head, Lorne, with scalded eyes, stood up and turned around, and the sword in his hand slashed, stabbed, and hacked at the goddess of war like a storm. The sharp wind pressure formed deep cuts on the ground around him. Interesting. Athena, who was in the center of the storm, raised her eyebrows, took small steps, and blocked, cut off, and shook the branches in her hands again and again. With such precision that not a single bit of energy was wasted, she easily isolated the violent and continuous sword power. As his brain continued to absorb, understand, and digest the fighting skills from the battlefield, Lorne became more and more courageous, and even his moves were no longer limited to the sword itself. Sometimes it was the ruthlessness of the spear, sometimes it was the opening and closing of the blade, and sometimes it was the shock and penetration of the blunt weapon. And his every move was mixed with the experience of fighting gods and monsters on the Sea of Oceanus, the tactical deception of the pursuit of the Atlantis guards, and even the Takai force releasing techniques, Badger's spear taking moves, and the defense and counter-attack of Aikido in the past memories. All the knowledge about fighting, whether it was learned by observation, learned in person, or just existed in theoretical fantasy, was integrated into Lorne's blood, bones, and even soul in this hearty duel, forming a clear imprint and instinct. This is the infinite battle, the infinite trial, and the infinite martial arts. Athena, who was fighting and retreating, felt the rapid transformation of the figure opposite her, and the loose corners of her lips unconsciously lifted up, outlining a shallow arc. Not bad, at least it looks good. However, after fighting for a full hour, Lorne suddenly stopped and stood still, his bloodshot eyes filled with dissatisfaction and anger. Fight back. Why don't you fight back? That's right. Until now, the goddess of war has basically been passively defending and counter-attacking, showing no intention of attacking at all. Let me fight back. Are you sure? Athena heard this, her purple eyes narrowed slightly, and her face seemed to be smiling. Of course. Fight. I want a pure fight. At this moment, Lorne's mind was filled with surging fighting spirit, and his thinking was completely airs. He looked at Athena opposite with burning eyes, and waved the sword in his hand again, launching a new round of attack. Come on, go crazy. Looking at Lorne who was rushing over, Athena's lips raised again, and the smile on her face was extremely bright. At the same time, the two little guys who heard the noise and slipped to the backyard porch secretly poked their heads out to watch the scene, showing different expressions. Little Medusa's white finger bones grasped the corner of her clothes, with a nervous look on her face. Nikki's eyes widened, looking like she was gloating. Bang! The sword slashed, and the figure who took the lead in charging, flew backwards like a cannonball, and fell straight into the dense rose bushes. Hiss! Lorne, who was lying on his butt, suddenly turned green, and bounced up from the ground, as if he had been electrocuted. He fumbled back with his hands and pulled out 7 or 8 bloody thorns in a row. Deliberate. This woman definitely did it on purpose. She must be avenging him for stealing her tribute before. At this moment, Lorne, with a mask of pain on his face, looked at Athena who was walking in the smoke with a smile on her face, and immediately secretly complained in his heart. Small-minded. Do you want to continue, friend? The branches in the hands of the goddess of wisdom beat rhythmically on her palms, and the expression on her face revealed a certain comfort and regret. Although it feels good to draw, it should be. However, Lorne, who has regained consciousness, reluctantly pulled up the half-broken branch on the ground. He did not retreat at all, but strode forward, with an even more intense fighting spirit gushing out of his body. Come again. Athena was slightly startled, and the smile on her face faded. While her dark purple eyes were filled with a trace of approval, her face gradually became cold. Very good. The red lips opened slightly, approving the person who dared to draw the sword against the gods, and the white hands waved, punishing the madman who offended the power of the gods. Puff. The whistling branches came through, easily tearing apart Lorne's shielding sword light, leaving a wound on his chest with rolled flesh and scarlet blood splattered. Chapter 47 Hester's Wail. Thump. Thump, thump. Lorne took several steps back before he stabilized his body. The muscles on his face twitched slightly, but his eyes became more fanatical and determined. It hurts a lot. But he can still move, he hasn't lost yet. Come again. With a low roar, the bleeding figure strode forward and chopped at the majestic god. Puff. Still ineffective. Another scar was engraved on the blasphemous body. Come again. Lorne got up from the ground and laughed heartily in pain. He guessed right. He would not die. Since he would not die, why should he fear failure? Why should he fear death? This opportunity is rare. He needs to use this confrontation as much as possible to continuously climb the ladder to the gods and touch the majesty of the gods. The gap is not unbridgeable. The constant is not unchangeable. Zeus, wash your neck and wait for me. Looking at the figure in front of her, being knocked down again and again, and climbing up again and again bathed in blood, the expression on Athena's face changed from the initial teasing to surprise, and finally to solemnity, and then she opened her cherry lips, and murmured in a low voice, "Watch carefully, learn well." The indifferent voice fell, and the goddess of wisdom and war, who had always passively counterattacked, took the initiative for the first time. Come. The bloody Lorne laughed and stood up. With the blessing of fighting spirit and divine blood, his body turned into a blood-red afterimage and rushed towards the god who was like a peak on the plain, swinging a sword that was several times faster than before in terms of speed, strength, skills, and will. Athena held a branch in her hand, repeatedly blocked Lorne's sword, and then stabbed, cut, and pierced the opposite body over and over again. Give pain to life, and punish sin with punishment. Again and again, over and over again. The wounds were so hideous that the bones could be seen. The flying flesh and blood splashed into the soil and fell into the dust. But even so, the bloody figure was so tenacious that it was almost terrifying. He was extremely sober and extremely crazy. Fight. Fight. After countless battlefields and endless martial arts training, the mind, skills, and body will eventually be melted into an indestructible edge with the fire from the gods. The night faded away and dawn fell. As a ray of light in the sky rose from the sea and sprinkled on the messy garden, Athena waved her hand and slashed the last sword. The bloody man, who had almost no good skin on his body, fell to the ground with a bang and never got up again. Lorne. Seeing the bloody figure lying on the ground, motionless, little Medusa could no longer hold back, shouting and rushing to the courtyard quickly. Don't touch him. However, before the little girl could do anything, Athena held her shoulders, glanced at the corpse lying on the ground, and snorted. Don't worry, he's not dead yet. But, little Medusa looked at the almost human-like Lorne in front of her, bit her cherry lips tightly, and couldn't bear it. Let him lie down well, because it's good for him. Athena on the side spoke helplessly, and comforted the little girl who was worried at the moment. I have taught him what I should teach. How much he can understand depends on himself. During this period, it's best for no one to touch him. Just let him lie there like this. Little Medusa pursed her lips, her eyes full of worry. Will he catch a cold? What if it rains? Seeing Medusa's aggrieved little expression, Athena sighed and waved helplessly. If you are really worried, you can just take care of him here. Yes. After getting permission, little Medusa nodded heavily, rushed forward quickly, squatted on the ground and guarded Lorne. Looking at the little Medusa who followed closely, it was Athena's turn to feel a little worried. She couldn't help but repeatedly remind him. Remember, if you don't want to disturb his rest, you'd better not move around, otherwise, his suffering will be in vain. After that, Athena walked up the corridor and waved to the subordinate goddess Nike beside her. We should go. Didn't you say that we should stay here for the harvest festival? Niki tilted her head and looked at her master in confusion, with some reluctance on her face. Are you sure you want to stay here? Athena rolled her eyes at her subordinate god, who was a little reluctant to leave, pointed to a bedroom on the second floor that was shrouded in a layer of faint golden light, and spoke softly. If you don't leave now, she will wake up. Niki was stunned, and her eyes followed her master's faint gaze, and fell on the vegetable garden and nursery in the backyard that was in a mess, as if it had been trampled by a tide of beasts, and she shuddered immediately. Crack. The golden barrier covering a bedroom upstairs was broken. The master and servant looked at each other, and immediately rushed out of the house, disappearing in the vast crowd. After a moment, an angry and painful cry sounded in a house, spreading throughout the entire city of Knossos. My vegetable garden. My garden. Who did it? The full of resentment spread outside the city. A master and servant on the boulevard paused for a moment and then sped away from the crime scene. At the same time, on the Sea of Oceanus, a tattered sampan was bobbing up and down with the waves. Two girls with long purple hair, highly similar faces, and gorgeous long dresses sat elegantly on each side of the boat, and no one had the intention of rowing. When can we get ashore? The purple-haired girl, who was relatively petite and more anxious in character, stroked her slightly sticky hair, and couldn't help but complain first. On the other side, the purple-haired girl, who was slightly older in manner, admired her beautiful face facing the sea, and her voice was neither salty nor bland. How should I know? Isn't it you who set the direction now? Wasn't it you who first drove the boat into the primitive ocean, almost crashed into the hometown of the Atlanteans, and then was chased all over the world by them? The twin sister rolled her eyes and complained unhappily. So, isn't it your turn? Hurry up, I'm still waiting to go ashore to trim my nails. The slightly older sister handed a paddle to the opposite side, looking like she was ordering a servant. The younger sister protested with a fist, coldly announcing her dominance. I'm the captain. You should listen to me. I'm a customer, not your boatman. According to the rules, you should serve me. You soiled my clothes and delayed me for so long. I didn't dislike your navigation skills, which is already reasonable. The elder sister was unmoved, like a noble princess who had never touched spring water, sitting elegantly and refutating. In addition, I have to add one more thing. I'm still the elder sister, and you have to listen to me. Don't use this matter to pressure me. You just hatched a few minutes earlier than me. What's the big deal? Whoever wants to be the captain can be the captain. Anyway, I don't want to do such rough work. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. The two sisters sat on both sides of the ship's side, staring at each other, letting the ship drift with the waves, and no one had the intention to take action. After an unknown period of silence, the younger sister bit her lip and spoke softly. Do you think that little Medusa will? Can't you feel whether she is dead or not? The elder sister snorted coldly, and a trace of impatience appeared on her elegant face. It seems that she doesn't like discussing this topic. The younger sister looked at the boundless Oceanus Sea, hesitant to speak. But, are you annoying? If you want to go ashore, row the boat quickly. The elder sister raised her hand and threw a paddle to the opposite side and habitually began to boss around. The younger sister rolled her eyes, did not refute, but just sat on the side honestly. Because her elder sister was holding another oar, the water surged and the sampan moved forward quickly. Little idiot, don't die. The younger sister was slightly stunned, looked to the side, and met an indifferent face. What are you looking at? Rowing. The elder sister snorted coldly, her face was as indifferent as before, as if she didn't care about anything as usual. Thanks to my friends, the goal has been achieved. I didn't expect so many people to respond. Thank you so much. I've been saving manuscripts recently, and I'll accumulate a wave of explosive updates. Chapter 48 The Stove Goddess Failed. Crete, the royal city of Knossos. With the arrival of the harvest festival, the whole street is filled with joy. After being busy for more than half a year, the residents can finally take some time off to clean up their homes and enjoy the freshly husked wheat and rice of this season. The smoke from the cooking in the evening rises. The warm fire rises, the sumptuous meals are served on the table, and the tempting aroma spreads from every household. In the square in the city that performs sacrificial functions, the priestesses in white robes hold torches, light fragrant wood and spices, and offer bulls, cows, pigs, fruits, beehives, fruit trees, rice ears and chestnuts to the goddess of agriculture Demeter, representing the harvest and festive offerings, and pray devoutly, hoping that they can continue to be blessed by the gods next year, and then the weather will be good. As sisters, Demeter's image is similar to Hera, but she looks kinder, and does not have the majesty of the Queen of Heaven. In the flickering firelight, the statue of Demeter being worshipped is a kind-looking woman, wearing a circular crown woven with golden wheat ears, holding a basket filled with wheat ears, daffodils, torches, fruit baskets, horns of plenty or sickles. From a distance, it seems as if you can see a hazy and warm glow in the dark night. As the ceremony gradually came to an end, the residents who had finished their dinner also walked out of their homes in twas and threes, sharing their homemade snacks and bread in the shape of horns of plenty with their neighbors. The noise of the festival and the aroma of food also entered Hestia's courtyard through the outer wall. However, this year, the goddess of the hearth did not open the door to enjoy the festive atmosphere as usual. Instead, she squatted in the nursery in the backyard, planting seedlings with muddy hands, and her white silver teeth squeaked under the starlight. Damn Athena, you just came and destroyed the house. I will never let you in next time. As Hestia worked, she complained about her restless niece. The best time to plant crops was around the harvest festival. She had to plant the new seedlings as soon as possible to bring life back to her ruined yard. Fortunately, although she had to spend some time behind closed doors to plant crops, the harvest festival celebration would last for 7 days. After she was done with this, she would have a chance to enjoy the festival. Hestia comforted herself by thinking that, after planting the last bunch of seedlings in her hand, she stood up and turned her head to look at the center of the yard. On the ground, covered with dead leaves and broken branches, a guest from afar was lying upright on the ground, motionless. Although nearly 100 hideous wounds on the surface of his body had initially healed and scabbed, he still did not wake up. His fists clenched tightly, his muscles were full of tension, and there were deep scars on his brows. It seemed that in his sleep, he was still fighting and killing himself. On the other side, a purple-haired little girl was squatting beside the man, waiting motionlessly. It's been 2 days. Was it necessary for Athena to be so harsh? Hestia shook her head and once again criticized the eldest niece who caused her trouble. Then she walked forward, patted the little girl on the shoulder, and pointed to the door with a smile. Anna, the harvest festival is here. It's a rare opportunity. Let's go out and have some fun. The laughter on the street and the fragrance wafting in made the little Medusa, who was still a child, show a little yearning. But then, she shook her head slightly, and her eyes fell on Lorne, who was lying dead on the ground. Hestia immediately understood, and immediately patted her chest, generously taking the responsibility. Don't worry, I will help keep an eye on him here, and he will be fine. However, little Medusa still shook her head, and looked at Lorne in front of her firmly. I'll wait for him to wake up. Seeing that she couldn't persuade this stubborn little girl, Hestia could only give up in disappointment, and scolded her niece in her heart for leaving a mess for her to clean up. The sun rises and sets, and the day and night change. Since Lorne, who was lying dead, showed no signs of waking up for several days, little Medusa settled down in Hestia's house. However, it is not right to eat and live for free. In order to repay this kindness, little Medusa, who has simple values and morals, began to help with housework in her spare time, or followed Hestia's ass to help water and loosen the soil in the nursery. Although the stove goddess didn't say it, she undoubtedly liked this cold-faced, warm-hearted, and extremely sensible little girl more and more. Not only did she often talk to her to relieve her boredom, but she also made her her own food critic. Even for several consecutive nights, Hestia invited Anna to stay together, and she wanted to drag the cute little Anna into the bed and squeeze her hard. Unfortunately, no matter how enthusiastic the goddess of the stove was, the guy lying dead in the yard was still the first person Anna missed. Whenever she finished her housework, little Anna would stay at the door and the second door, squatting by Lorne's side at a regular time, eagerly waiting for him to wake up. Not only that, when the sun was scorching, she would put up a partition for it. When the wind and rain were approaching, she would hold up a big umbrella for it. When the night turned cold, she would move the brazier in the house, lie quietly by the side, and wait until dawn. Even though Hestia had persuaded several times, and promised solemnly, that a certain tough guy would be fine, the little girl with a stubborn spirit in her bones still did her own thing. TSK, when will this guy wake up? Inside the house, just as Hestia had tidied up the living room, she was sitting by the fire as usual, looking at the backyard and muttering, when a crisp knocking sound came from the door. The bored goddess of the stove subconsciously got up and opened the door. As the familiar smiling face appeared in the half-open door, Hestia's forehead was immediately covered with black lines, and then without saying a word, she slammed the door shut and snorted angrily at the outside. I'm not here. No one. Are you sure? A playful question came, and Athena, who was visiting outside the door, raised the corner of her lips, playing with a small crystal bottle between her fingers, and her voice was cheesing. I came here this time with the secret dew of life that I finally got from Aunt Demeter. If you weren't here. Bang. Before Athena could finish, Hestia, who couldn't hold back, opened the door and snatched the crystal bottle of transparent liquid from Athena's hand with shining eyes. She couldn't let it go and rubbed it against her cheek. This is the secret dew of life that has the divinity of the god of agriculture and can make all things rejuvenate. Finally, there is no need to worry that the seedlings in the yard will not survive the winter. So, can I come in now, Aunt? Athena, who was outside the door, smiled at Hestia, who looked satisfied, and asked with a smile. The face of the goddess of the hearth turned from gloomy to bright. She rolled her eyes at the niece who had left her with a lot of messes, and snorted and opened the door. You still have a conscience. Who is the queen? There is no need to say, right? Chapter 49 Training in Progress. After getting the promise, Athena smiled without saying anything, and walked into the house with her subordinate goddess Nikki, sitting leisurely on the bench in front of the table. After looking around, she looked at the backyard thoughtfully. What? Hasn't he woken up yet? You said he's been lying here for almost half a month. Speaking of this, Hestia, who was forced to clean up the butt of this niece, couldn't help but be angry. Don't worry, it's almost time. Athena smiled and comforted, shaking the empty cup in her hand, signaling to her aunt. Hestia glared at her niece, took out a pot of fruit wine she had mixed from the cupboard, and filled the cup in front of her. By the way, she also poured a cup for Nikki, who was looking at her eagerly. As the master and servant drank the sour and sweet fruit wine in one gulp, savoring the wonderful taste of the collision of the tip of the tongue, Hestia put down the pottery pot, sat opposite, frowned and looked at the niece. Speaking of which, why did you suddenly treat this little guy so harshly? This is not your habit. It's rare to see a good seedling, so I took the opportunity to temper his spirit and train him. Athena picked up the pottery pot and refilled her cup, while looking at the backyard, and answered casually. It should be more than that. Hestia raised her eyebrows and snorted. You came to your house twice for this little guy. You don't seem to be such a leisurely person. The goddess of the hearth sitting opposite looked at Athena in front of her with suspicion. In terms of mind, although she couldn't be compared with the eldest niece who was known as the goddess of wisdom, she could still understand the temperament and habits of this eldest niece after thousands of years of contact. Seeing Hestia's suspicion, Athena simply stopped hiding it, put down the pottery cup, and pondered leisurely. I saw his talent, and wanted to keep him, and train him to be my subordinate god. Why did you suddenly have this idea? Hestia was a little surprised, and even a little puzzled. Generally speaking, every subordinate god is closely related to the main god, and their power is connected. They prosper together and suffer together, so they need to be extremely cautious. Athena did not carefully select from the demigods of Olympus, but instead chose this little guy who she met by chance in Knossos. Hestia really couldn't understand what Athena meant. It's not sudden, but I have had this idea for a long time, but I haven't found the right person. Athena turned the cup in her hand, looked at the street market outside the window, and sighed quietly. Last time, I went to see King Minos, and persuaded him to be patient, and resume the sacrifice to my father and uncle, but he was determined not to serve the main gods of Olympus anymore. Hestia heard this and fell silent. In the world created by the gods, it is probably needless to say what the consequences of offending the gods are. The old humans who were drowned in the flood are the best example. Hestia wanted Athena to persuade King Minos again, but she opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. As a husband, his wife was violated by a beast. As a monarch, his face was trampled by the gods. Any man with blood would probably not tolerate it easily. If it weren't for this wise king with a good reputation, who was still concerned about his subjects and the survival of the entire island of Crete, he might have drawn his sword against the sea god to defend his dignity as a man. Although she was one of the gods, Hestia had lived in the world for a long time and had almost been assimilated by the secular world. She couldn't blame King Minos for his choice. What's more, King Minos also had a clear distinction between gratitude and resentment. He only stopped the sacrifices to male gods such as Zeus and Poseidon, and the offerings to Athena, Demeter, and Hera, the goddess of the hearth, remained unchanged. In this way, Hestia couldn't speak even more. However, if this deliberate neglect was noticed by the gods, it would probably usher in a tragic end. Whether it was King Minos or the Minoans, the almost foreseeable ending emerged in Hestia's mind. She bit her lip and was a little reluctant. Is there no other way? I don't know. I can only try, but I can't disobey the authority of the father. Athena glanced at Nikki, who rushed to the backyard and talked happily with little Medusa, and her voice turned low. At least, not now. Hestia seemed not to have heard her niece's rebellious remarks. She turned her head and looked at the guy lying dead in the backyard, thinking, so, you want to keep him in Knossos, just in case. Athena nodded slightly and spoke frankly. Since this is the fate chosen by humans themselves, we should let go when it's time to let them go, and let them find their own way. The goddess of wisdom looked out the window at the vast and lofty sky, her eyes deep and far-reaching. Even if they are children, they will eventually grow up and leave the cradle. That's what they said, but what can they do about things that we can't change? Hestia shook her head, her face full of worry. Not entirely. Athena smiled, her thin cherry lips curled up a little. The last flood has already made our old grandmother very unhappy, not to mention that the new humans who have survived the disaster have also received her blessing. The people in Olympus will be more restrained because of this. Even if they want to take action, I'm afraid they won't dare to be as blatant as before. Hestia's eyes lit up when she heard this. In the Bronze Age, the original humans created by Prometheus and Athena became more and more corrupt because of the opening of Pandora's box. In the name of keeping the world pure, the gods launched a flood to exterminate the old humans who were considered dirty. For a time, the earth turned into a vast ocean, and thousands of lives disappeared in an instant. This move aroused the dissatisfaction of Gaia, the mother goddess of the earth. As the goddess of the earth and the mother of the gods, Gaia's divinity will give hope and blessings to all life on earth. To cleanse the life on earth with a flood is tantamount to a great offense to her. Therefore, the mother goddess Gaia sheltered Deucalion, a descendant of Prometheus, and his wife Hera, and delivered oracles to the two in the temple on Mount Parnassus, guiding them to continue the fire of mankind. The land is the mother seed of all things, and the stone is my skeleton. You put on your veil. Take off your clothes, pick up the soil and stones on the ground, and scatter them on the land outside the temple. So, the two threw the soil and stones on the land behind them according to the will of the mother goddess Gaia. Then, the soil behind them gradually became tangible, and became flesh and blood, and the stone became soft bones, and the texture on the stone became meridians. The soil thrown out by Deucalion became a man, and the soil thrown out by Hera became a woman. A new human race was born from this. So, in a sense, today's human beings are also descendants of the mother goddess Gaia. Although this old grandmother has been sleeping in the temple of Mount Parnassus for many years, her power is still there. If she wants to launch another flood to destroy the world, even the king of gods Zeus has to weigh the consequences of angering the old grandmother. I will do my best to mediate in Olympus, to prevent them from personally taking action. Athena said her plan in a deep voice, and then looked at the backyard with a faint gaze. But whether they can break the deadlock depends on themselves. Are you sure he is the one you are looking for? Hestia pursed her lips, a little worried. How can we know, if we don't try? Athena said lightly, and her admiration for a little guy in the backyard was overflowing. And don't underestimate him. There are not many people who can take so many of my swords and still be alive. At this moment, as she recalled the scene when the two sides first met, a meaningful color appeared on the face of the goddess of wisdom. No matter what, this little bastard who dared to steal her tribute was better than those half-bloods in Olympus who trembled in fear when they saw the gods and dared not resist at all. Chapter 50 Pots, Pans, and Spoons, submit to me. Seeing that her eldest niece had made up her mind, Hestia waved her hand helplessly. Forget it, do whatever you want. I can't control these things anyway. You said it so lightly. If you can really let it go, is it necessary to squat in Knossos all day long? Athena rolled her eyes at Hestia opposite her, and bluntly exposed the duplicity of her aunt. Hearing this, the goddess of the hearth blushed slightly, and she stiffened her neck to argue. I just like the food here. I like the fireworks here. Yes, you are right. Athena perfunctorily said without sincerity, her eyes full of teasing. Under the smiling gaze of her niece, Hestia, who was getting more and more embarrassed, gradually blushed and got up angrily to drive people away. Go away, don't bother me, if you have nothing to do. Okay, I'll leave right away, okay. Athena raised her hands in surrender, got up and left her seat, and called Nikki in the backyard to evacuate. However, the moment the master and servant stepped out of the door, a goddess of wisdom turned back leisurely, with the corners of her lips curled up. But we've agreed that you can't blame me this time. Huh. Hearing this nonsense, Hestia was stunned. But before she could react, the ground under her feet shook violently, and a violent tide of magic surged and boiled. Boom. In an instant, accompanied by a thunderclap, the entire backyard was covered with grass debris, branches, and leaves fell, and dense green mud dots fell like rain. Hestia turned her head stiffly, looking at her nursery that was dug 3 feet deep, and a tall figure in the middle of the courtyard with a body full of scarlet blood. My vegetable garden, my garden. I shouldn't have planted it. The stove goddess had empty eyes and muttered. Her voice seemed to have a little crying. Seeing Hestia's expression of despair, Lorne, the perpetrator, quickly raised his hands in surrender and made a promise. No, I'll pay. Can't I pay it all? Hearing that someone was going to pay, the face of the stove goddess turned from gloomy to bright, and she stretched out 2 white fingers fiercely. Not enough. I want double. Okay, all is fine. Lorne hurriedly agreed, signed the terms with a bitter face, and secretly comforted himself in his heart. Double is double. After all, it was wrong first, just treated as a disguised compensation for the stove goddess's previous provision of food, lodging and care for them. It's better to put in some work than to directly offend a main god who rarely gets close to humans. Time flies, and several months pass in a flash. In the morning, just as the sky on Crete was getting light, the residents of the royal city of Knossos opened their doors one after another, rising smoke from cooking and preparing for the morning meal. The clashing of pots and pans and the crowing of chickens and barking of dogs gradually awakened the prosperous background of the city. Zeus, go to hell. Lorne, who woke up from the bed, raised his middle finger as usual and sent a wave of blessings to his father, the king of gods. An ordinary day starts with blasphemy, and then, a guy who spoke rudely to the gods raised his hand and summoned the 12-sided dice in his body and rolled a .12. Herm's blessing? Today's luck is not bad. Lorne muttered to himself, then sat up from the bed and stretched his limbs lazily. The 12-sided dice spinning next to him drew a ray of light blue divine light from the invisible air and quietly introduced it into the host's body. Lorne closed his eyes and felt the extra light feeling in his flesh and blood, as well as the vaguely improved reaction ability of his limbs, and couldn't help but let out a comfortable moan. After a moment, the wonderful experience gradually disappeared. He opened his eyes and sincerely praised the relatives on Mount Olympus. Cool. The coins exploded by the 12 main gods are cool. Herm's divine blessing this time should be biased towards enhancing the body's reaction speed sensitivity. About 3% improvement. The benefits that can be exchanged for a swear word are simply bloody money. Lorne glanced at the 12-sided dice that automatically dissipated into a stream of light at the head of the bed. He stroked the heckled wheel that gradually disappeared on his chest with some regrets, and even began to miss the feeling when this thing fooled him when it opened. After several months of running in, he further understood some of the rules of dice of chance. First of all, since the things in the friendship pool can explode, Icarus wings, which can play a great role in a certain occasion, they must not be all garbage. And the reason why I didn't touch the good things is probably because the difficulty of the daily book is low. After all, it is fair that low risk corresponds to low returns. Whether it is necessary or accidental, they basically follow this rule. However, when the frequency is high enough, the advantage of accidental will be reflected. It can really explode good things. For example, get the blessing of the gods and the baptism of divinity corresponding to the number. Ares' unyielding fighting spirit, the life healing of the god of agriculture, the affinity of the sea god for water, Apollo's intuition, Herm's sensitivity and speed. These have the probability of being obtained from accidental opportunities after completing the blasphemy of the 12 gods of necessity. Of course, this probability is very low. So far, Lorne has used up all the 100 draws he has saved, and has only touched the blessings of Hermes once, Ares twice, Apollo once, and Hestia once in the ordinary pool. Moreover, although these divine baptisms bring improvements, the magnitude will not be very large. In addition, the 12 main gods control more than one kind of authority, so the randomness is also very large. Among them, the divine baptism given to him by Hestia is the most difficult. Perhaps because of the authority of the goddess of home, that divine baptism actually improved his control over kitchen utensils and cooking. Lorne wanted to complain. Did he expect him to come into the kitchen and say something when he was fighting with his opponent? Pots and pans, submit to me. The picture was too beautiful, and he didn't dare to imagine it. However, it was important to be able to get good benefits from the ordinary pool, but what really concerned Lorne was that the 12-sided dice could actually secretly strip away the divinity of the 12 main gods from destiny and infuse it into him. This thing, isn't it too buggy? And all along, a certain conjecture in his heart seemed to be verified by this. Using accidental variables to pry the inevitable fate, and finally collapse the foundation of the gods. Perhaps, this is the real role of the dice. Lorne's eyes flickered faintly, and there was something in his eyes. High risk and high return. Willing to spend such a huge amount of money. It seems that his angel investor wants a lot of things. But soon, he sneered and shook his head. Forget it. Since it is certain that this is a path that can shake the divine authority, let's not think about it for the time being. I'm just a pawn crossing the river, far from the stage, where I can sit at the poker table and go all in to decide life and death. It won't be too late to place a bet when I have enough capital. So, today's task is. Lorne took a deep breath, solemnly bid farewell to the warm bed, got up and went downstairs, waving a hoe, and rushed to the nursery in the backyard, digging holes and planting. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.